Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Weird Dog Nezdu Adopted? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. It had been a horrible day at school that day. The teacher had announced to the class that he wanted to go to UA's Heroes course. Of course, the other students laughed. Katsuki had yelled and used his quirk, illegally, to intimidate Izuku. Katsuki had jeered at him, threatened him, and to top off his insults and physical abuse, decided to suicide bait Izuku. Izuku's stomach seemed to tumble down a seemingly never-ending cavern as those words were processed through his mind. Katsuki sneered, tilting his head up and strutting away at the sight of Izuku's pale freckled face. However, that was only the beginning of Izuku's horrific day. Red shoes hit the concrete pavement, wobbling slightly as shuddering breaths racked his frame. The damp pages of his notebook were tearing slightly as his white-knuckled grip shook, vision blurred as tears bubbled up uncontrollably. He wasn't paying attention to the clutter of a drain cover hitting the ground from a powerful force. He didn't notice until he was being engulfed. Drowned. The cackling above him made him panic further as the slime villain went on about how useless he was without a quirk to take control of, but he'd make a useful escape disguise. He was desperate after all. Just as Izuku was losing conscious, he felt something burning in his veins before he passed out. Just in time for Izuku's last breath, All Might smashed through the drain cover and blasted the villain all over the walls. He was quick to check on Izuku. Realizing his pulse was gone, he begun CPR and called for an ambulance. Meanwhile, the slime villain escaped in silence. When Izuku awoke, it was to beeping and the smell of chemicals. It was sharp and made his nose and eyes water and burn. He felt itchy all over and his head hurt a lot. Besides his bed sat an emaciated blonde-haired man. His blue eyes were sunken into his skull. He wore a long baggy white shirt and green cargo trousers. Izuku didn't know this man. "I see you're awake. How are you feeling?" the stranger asked. Izuku remained silent, unsure what to say as the man searched the room awkwardly. "Right, well, I'm Yagi Tashinori." He bowed his head and presented a card. "I'm All Might's secretary. He saved you and brought you back with CPR. He signed your notebook too, but he couldn't be here personally, people to save and villains to catch. I was sent to check on you, hope you don't mind." Izuku took the card and scanned it over. It looked official enough. "Sorry to bother both you and All Might," Izuku spoke softly with guilt. He didn't want to burden them both, especially not All Might. "It wasn't a bother, son." Mr. Tashinori smiled as Izuku looked down at his sheets. Izuku was silent for a moment. Yagi begun to wonder if he should leave, but he hadn't gotten his mother's contact yet so they could contact her. "I really am weak. Useless, I couldn't defend myself." Izuku sobbed, eyes watering and bubbling down his cheeks. "You're not useless, son. Why would you say such a thing?" "Because I'm quirkless," was his reply. It shocked Tashinori that he'd ever meet a quirkless child. In this generation it must be super rare. There was silence for a moment as both sat running over the events that happened previously. Izuku sniffled. He looked up at Tashinori and showed a wobbly smile. "I need to get stronger. I still want to be a hero." Tashinori panicked. He'd seen this child die once already. He was lucky to bring him back. He can't encourage this boy to be a hero without a quirk and watch him die again. Making up his mind, he took in a long breath of air and spoke. "All Might wouldn't want you to become a hero. You're quirkless, you'd be at a serious disadvantage in every fight. You'd face adversity from other heroes and citizens. You die. Becoming a hero is just unachievable for you. I'm sorry, kid." Izuku's face fell and he looked down at the sheets of his hospital bed. Once again there was silence before Tashinori sighed and stood up. "You're wrong," Izuku claimed, face full of stubborn defiance. "All Might would never say that." Tashinori paused, sighed and headed for the door. "I'll be back with a doctor. We need to contact your parents." Moments later the door opened again. This time in walked All Might himself, grimacing thoroughly as he saw Izuku's eye light up in awe. "I heard from my secretary that you want to be a hero." He was awkward, and Izuku was surprised. This was nothing like the confidence he radiated on TV. I also heard you're quirkless. I'm sorry, son. It's good to dream, but try to have realistic goals. You could never be a hero, you'd be a liability. Try becoming a police officer if you want to help people. It's a noble path. Sure, a lot of people don't think the police are necessary anymore and will try to tell you that, but you'd be saving people then too. Pain and rage built up in Izuku's chest. Rage. He'd never felt rage before. It was a horrible feeling, suffocating, like chains were wrapped around his lungs. Pulling tighter and tighter. Though that could have been the impending panic attack. Izuku didn't notice when the door opened and a doctor walked in. He was too busy processing the pain of having the last shred of hope in his dream crushed, along with the incessant itching and burning in his veins. His head was pounding and the top of his head ached as if something was trying to break through his skull. Hours passed. Izuku was silent in shock as his mother drove him home. He sat in the back seat of their small family car, which Inko used to drive to work every morning. She was checking Izuku in the rearview mirror constantly. Because of this, Izuku never passed the slime villain again while it had his childhood best friend now tormentor caught up in its grasp and attempting to free himself with his quirk all fired up to the max, setting fire to the nearby trash and building, as the heroes stood by and watched because they were inequipped. We missed Izuku running in to save the day and earning All Might's respect. He never gets to train with All Might in preparation for earning his quirk and entering the UA's entrance exams. Izuku follows a different path. When Izuku awoke in the morning, everything seemed brighter and more vibrant. The complete opposite of his mood as he stood up and stretched his arms up over his head, bumping his arm off of something. He reached up and grabbed whatever it was and felt it. He pulled and felt his head follow. So he made his way to the family bathroom and looked in the mirror. Upon his head was stark white antlers, tufts of white fur covering them, lightly turning green as they meet his head. On his forehead was a strange making, in the shape of an eye. He noticed the gold markings make their way sporadically down his neck and onto his arms. Izuku lifted his shirt and found them on his chest and stomach, leading down his legs and onto his feet. The pupil of his eyes was bright gold instead of black, surrounded by his normal green that seemed more vibrant and almost glowing. Naturally he screamed. Inko came rushing through the house, from the kitchen where she was preparing herself and Izuku's lunchboxes. She knocked on the door as she entered and found her son looking very strange. She too was in shock, and tried to wipe away the marking on his forehead. "Did you draw this, sweetie?" Her voice warbled. She strangely felt confused the longer she made eye contact with her son. "I woke up like this. I can feel them." He was frantic. "There's nerves in the antlers and I can feel them." The two Midorias spent the morning panicking and frantically calling for doctor's appointments. The closest appointment Inko could get was 2 days away, and that was an emergency appointment. Izuku sat on the couch, hugging his knees with a blanket draped over his head and antlers. A steaming cup of tea was nestled in his hands. He was watching a fight with the rabbit hero, Miruko, on the TV. He was analyzing her in his head, but didn't have the energy to write it in his new notebook. "Aizu, sweetie?" Inko begun. Izuku shifted his head to show that he was listening to her without taking his eyes off the TV. "I'm going to see Mitsuki. She's going to recommend me to the doctor that helped Katsuki. I'll be back in an hour or so." "Okay, Mum," he'd whispered. Shortly after his mother left, he went to his computer and checked his Discord server, having noticed his mods pinging him and DMing him. Apparently a fight broke out over a fan of All Might and Endeavor, about who deserved the spot as the top hero. It was a stupid fight in Izuku's opinion. All Might would always win, though as he thought this a sliver of pain shot up at the memory of his dreams being crushed to smithereens. Apparently his rage was back too. Fists clenching and unclenching as this nervous energy built up inside of him. He took a deep breath, grabbed the antlers and screamed as loud as he could while tugging at them incessantly. It ended with Izuku on the floor, sobbing his little heart out, and scrubbing the eye marking off his forearm. A spark shot through him, his mind going numb briefly as knowledge flowed through his mind. He could perfectly envision his mother sitting at a table in a deep abyss of darkness. Opposite her was Aunt Mitsuki, sitting with her hands resting on top of Inko's shaking ones. Inko was crying, bright red and puffy from the tears, her eyeliner running down her cheeks. I just don't know how to help him, Mitsuki. It was so sudden. He should be overjoyed, he's been waiting for this since he was 4. Since I picked him up yesterday from the hospital, he's been silent, depressed. I don't know what's wrong with my baby. Izuku was pulled out his mind as the numbing sensation left him. He sat stunned on the floor for a few minutes. Somehow he knew that was real, how he didn't know, but he did. Deciding against a mental breakdown, he put his energy into something positive. His followers had been asking for an analysis on another hero. So Izuku got up from the floor and dragged himself over to his desk, where he sat on his spinning chair and slid across the floor to the bookcase by the desk. There he looked at the collection of notebooks and pulled one out the case. Flipping through the pages, he landed on the analysis of the hero Selkie. He hadn't done an analysis on him before. Izuku's channel had gained popularity when he did an analysis on the top-ranking competitors of last year's sports festival at UA. People noticed his skills in analysis and followed and shared his work. His viewers skyrocketed overnight and had been steadily growing since. Izuku usually wore a black surgical mask to cover his freckles and a green hoodie. That would have to change given his new appearance. He paused looking into his camera, seeing the antlers in the reflection of the lens, and decided against showing his face. He would only record his screen and audio for the future. By the time Inko got back, later than she hoped, Izuku was finishing editing his video and just about to post it. He stood up and approached his mother tentatively. "Izuku, sweetie, how are you feeling?" she asked, quiet, but she didn't look like she had been crying. Izuku knew that was wrong though. The vision had been too vivid, too lucid to be fake. It didn't feel like a dream felt. Izuku looked at the floor. "None of my hoodies fit anymore. I can't get them over these antlers." Inko paused. She hadn't thought about that. She'd have to buy modified clothes for him if he wanted to wear things that had to go over his head. Probably a stretchier fabric so he could pull it over the antlers. She could modify the hoods of his zip-up hoodies so they allowed his antlers to pass through. "All right, we can do that. Can you find me a clothes shop for mutation quirks, and bring me all your zip-up hoodies? I'll alter the hoods." The night was filled with sorting Izuku's wardrobe, pulling out what wasn't stretchy enough to stretch over his antlers, and cutting holes and slits in hoods, before hemming and sewing clip buttons into the hoods, so he could pull the hood up and around the antlers. For the next day or so, Izuku spent all of his time inside his house, too afraid to be seen. "I'm afraid it says here that he's quirkless," the doctor spoke, confused at the screen of his computer that spoke what was clearly not true. People didn't just sprout antlers overnight after all. Clearly not. Inko's words were harsh with a tone Izuku couldn't distinguish. "My son didn't have horns and tattoos? Tattoos of eyes. Eyes of all things, until 2 days ago, when he woke up with them." Izuku winced at her tone. Clearly she wasn't comfortable with his new appearance yet. Izuku couldn't blame her, he wasn't fond of it either. After all, it was just that morning he was screaming at his own arm when one of the tattoo-like markings blinked. Inko had yet again come running, and when Izuku frantically described what happened, she'd visibly shuddered. Eyes were supposed to stay on your face, and tattoos weren't supposed to be sentient. Perhaps this is the effect of someone else's quirk? She spoke, trying to keep Inko and Izuku calm. Both had already flooding the doctor's office with tears when explaining the situation. Dr. Tanaka was sure some poor janitor was out there right now, mopping salt water off the floor. "Tell me what happened the day before this. It says here you were in hospital. Were you hit by someone's quirk?" She'd asked, remaining as calm and professional as possible as she saw Inko's eyes bubbling up. "I was attacked by a villain. He tried to take over my body. My heart stopped before All Might could save me. I woke up in the hospital," Izuku explained, shaking at some parts and unsure at others. Overall, it was a traumatic experience he wasn't entirely sure he was comfortable talking about, especially with a stranger. "I see." She smiled. "Saved by All Might? Lucky you." Izuku could only grimace. "Sure. Lucky." Inko gave him some side eye at the concept of her All Might fanatic son, not overjoyed at the fact that he was personally saved by his hero himself. She'd been worried since she picked him up all those days ago, It was only growing as she saw his collection of All Might stuff piled neatly in a box stuffed to the back of his wardrobe. Blue sheets on his bed, sheets he'd found at the back of the cupboard. His All Might duvet sheets were washed and folded away in the box, next to his collectible statues and accessories. Inko was brought back to reality when Dr. Tanaka spoke again. Sounds like a rare case of trauma-induced quirk activation. It can happen when the quirk is suppressed or dormant, so to say. If the quirk needs specific activation method to activate, and you just hadn't found it or met the requirements yet. For example, say you had a strength quirk, but your body was too weak to handle the quirk, you wouldn't be able to use it till you were stronger, but in the event you're in a life or death situation, it could trigger the activation of the quirk in a moment of hysteria as a self-defense mechanism. Inko and Izuku nodded along silently. Usually there's some drawbacks when this happens. Sticking with the super strength theme, the muscles could be so badly torn that they'd need weeks to heal or need to be hospitalized. You don't seem to have any negative drawbacks as of yet? Though she supposed the fact that staring at him, he never looked quite human was a drawback. His arms slightly too long and his eyes slightly too large, his grin simply too wide and his teeth too pointed. It was like staring directly into the uncanny valley. She went silent, turned to her computer screen and began typing. Regardless, if you have any problems, let me know. Ms. Midoriya, you have my number, please call anytime. If anything about his quirk emerges, let me know. She handed Inko another business card just in case Inko didn't have her contact details saved. Now, in the meantime, and this may take a while, but legally we can change your quirk status. You'll need a name for it though, so when you go to the registration office, have one ready. For the next few days Izuku found himself buried in rubbish on Dagoba Beach, trying to figure out what his quirk could do. He'd discovered that he could turn his limbs into tentacles, and stretch them far. He wanted to see how far. Standing in a clearing he had made the prior day, centered in a mountain of trash so no one could see him, he stretched out his disproportioned arm and held it straight out in front of himself, before the arm wiggled and bent where joints weren't supposed to be, and in a burst-like motion, was a long purple tentacle. Running his flesh hand over his now purple monster-like arm, it wasn't slimy like it looked but smooth. Like how a snake looks covered in slime when in actuality it's just very shiny and smooth. Holding his arm up with his hand, he closed his eyes and concentrated on making the limb grow and stretch. And to his astonishment, slowly but surely it did. Grasping onto the feeling he found as he stretched his new arm, across the sandy clearing and toward a mountain of rubbish. Yes! Izuku yelled, excitement making his throw his arms in the air, the long purple tentacle following and whipping around in the sky, looking as if a kraken had taken over cleaning the beach. Cleaning the beach? Izuku would use his new quirk to clean the beach to train with it. The quirk registration office was huge, it was white and official, and it had these black granite benches that Izuku found really uncomfortable and slidey. His clammy hands stuck to the granite like glue, and as his name was called he had to peel his hands off the bench. Inko and Izuku made their way into the room, Izuku shuffling his feet against the gray carpeted hall. Inko sent him a small warning glare for shuffling his feet that Izuku missed as he was staring at the floor. The man, extremely tall and with a long thin tail, almost reptilian with scales, led them into a small room with huge glass windows and a glass door leading into the hallway. On the door was a number 4 and a name, Yamamoto. Izuku sat on a cushioned chair by his mother, shaking his knee and fiddling with his hands. Inko reached over and rested her hand on top of Izuku's with a gentle squeeze, encouragement that he's fine and there's no need to be nervous. In Izuku's mind he had every right to be nervous. Last time he was here he was registering as quirkless, and the discrimination he got from the staff once it was stated that he had not received a quirk and never would be, was a horrible first experience of what he had to expect in life. Sure, that would be changing now, but that didn't take away the experiences he had. So, a quirk status update? He spoke, swirling round in his chair as he typed in a password, over enthusiastic about hitting the enter button. Inko nodded her head and he smiled. Discovered something new? He hummed as he scrolled through the online platform for the registry. Inko paused, something like that. He paused, eyes lingering over the word quirkless by his name. Was his only verbal reaction. He glanced Izuku's way with his peripheral vision with pity in his eyes. Another thing Izuku hated. He felt anger boil in him once again. He clenched his fist and grit his teeth as he sat in silence. Well, tell me about your quirk. Mr. Yamamoto clasped his hands together enthusiastically and spun around to face Izuku. Izuku paused. He'd prepared for this. He'd been analyzing his quirk for days now. Every instance he'd memorized a different example of what happened with his quirk. I think the eye markings link up to the fact that I am aware and can witness every time someone mentions or talks about me. And I can turn my limbs into tentacles. They can stretch up to 15 feet so far. Interesting, and do you have a name for it? He smiled, typing away on his computer's keyboard as Izuku finished speaking. Izuku went silent, unsure if it was ever a good name. It was pretty uncreative anyways, and very obvious too. Eldritch. I want to call it Eldritch. Izuku was back on the beach again, his arm in tentacle form wrapped around a large fridge and lifting it up over into a pile of electrical appliances to take to the dump. He was training with his quirk but also training his body. He needed to get stronger. By cleaning the beach he would build up muscle. He'd also convinced his mum to allow him to go to a gym. It took a few days, but she was less worried about him now that he had something to defend himself with, even if defending himself with a quirk is frowned upon. The beach faded from his vision. In his head he clearly pictured his mother, gathering pans and such while muttering to herself that she'd need to call Izuku home for dinner. Izuku blinked the vision away and rubbed his eyes, pulling out his phone and texting his mother that he was on his way. He pulled back his arm, the long purple tentacle coiling back and wriggling back to arm length, before bursting outwards and showing the form of his human arm underneath. The fridge he was holding dropped the last few inches to the ground and shuddered. Izuku began his jog home, ignoring the strange looks he got from strangers as he exited the beach. He'd have to ask his mum to hire a van for the week if he's gonna get most of the trash to the dump. Izuku was beginning to get used to his new appearance. His antlers still got tangles in his shirts, but his mum bought some stretchy t-shirts and hoodies for him to wear. She asked if he wanted some foundation or tattoo cover-up for his markings. It made him wince a little when she carefully eyes the corner of an eye marking peeking out from under his long-sleeved shirt. Izuku denied anything that would cover up his new look. It made him uncomfortable to cover up the eyes. He guessed it was because he was getting used to his new antlers and markings. He supposed it would take his mother longer. He still hadn't returned to school. Inko pulled him out after the accident with the Sludge villain, deciding with his new look that he'd study at home and do the work online. Thankfully she was able to sign him up for a course. The work was easy. Izuku would sit down at his desk in the morning and work away through his subjects while his mother worked away at the office. She worked at just 20 minuets away. He found it great. He didn't have to wear a stiff uniform anymore and he wasn't bullied. He couldn't miss his classes, not when he was actually getting his work done faster without having to worry about spitballs and crude comments. He was getting the work done so much faster that he was finished all the subjects' work by the end of the day, including the homework and essays. The teacher marking his work got in contact with his mother after just 2 days and informed her that he was well above the level he was working at and needed a more challenging education. By the time Inko got home from work one Thursday evening, Izuku was posting his analysis on an American Hero, Cowgirl. "Aiza darling, I have news," Inko said as she dropped of the groceries she'd picked up en route home onto the table. Izuku heard her call and came down the stairs. Inko had her back to Izuku as he approached her. Clearly she hadn't heard him, as when Izuku cleared his throat to announce himself, Inko jumped several feet into the air and yelped. "Dear God!" She'd yelled, resting her hand against her heart as if holding it there would stop the beating. The dear God. Izuku mumbled to himself. Apparently Inko heard as she gave his some devastating side eye, to which Izuku gulped and began helping her clear away the groceries. "I got news today, your teacher called." Inko began. "Oh no," Izuku thought, "I failed that badly? I knew I shouldn't have been so overconfident with my answers and checked them a 4th time. They're moving you up to high school level classes, isn't that exciting?" She had her back turned away from him as she put some red peppers into the fridge. Izuku visibly deflated in relief. Having not expected that, he stuttered out a reply. High school. My baby boy is a genius. Inko was thrilled. Her child seemed to be thriving now that he'd left school. She wondered what was holding him back before. Or perhaps this intelligence came with the quirk. Izuku chuckled nervously, before backing out the room and returning to his bedroom. High school level work? How was he supposed to manage that? He wasn't a high schooler. Discord was blowing up, people putting in requests for hero analysis from all over the world, presumably from countries his followers were from. Majority of them were Japanese, but there were a few American and European followers. Izuku was just glad that he could understand English, otherwise he couldn't understand a lot of his followers. He was proud of his ability to speak English, when none of his past classmates were able to. Even Kaken had a hard time speaking and learning English. Katsuki made up for that in sign language though, while Izuku learnt with him at a young age, in case Katsuki ever lost his hearing due to his quirk. He already has tinnitus. Not that he'd ever own up to there being a problem with his ears, but Izuku had been observing and admiring him for years. He knew when his old best friend was hiding something, even when he tried to hide it from Izuku by hiding behind insults and beatings. Izuku was a nice person, but even he had his limits. His new limits of anger and realizing he's worth more than what Katsuki treated him as was still new, raw, and unsure. He didn't know how to tame the rage that followed with every look of pity or disgust thrown at him in the streets. Izuku didn't know how to handle the bursts of confidence that popped out between the towers of anxiety, confidence that encouraged him to work out, to clean the beach and drove his determination to become a hero even further. It was scary, it was new and untamable. He was beginning to feel uncomfortable in his own skin. The spine-crawling feeling of something aligned to bloodlust slithered up his spine and he felt so hungry, suddenly and unforgivably hungry. He needed to do something with this energy, boiling and bubbling through his veins. Quickly grabbing his headphones, he put them over his head and started playing some rock music at the highest setting, so he could feel the beat humming through his head. He mouthed the words to his favorite band and slumped belly first onto his bed, scrolling through the Discord requests. Requests for another analysis on Empty Lady, to Endeavor and even some new debuting heroes in various countries. None of them really stood out yet, until one particular question piqued his interest. What do you think about the Japanese hero commission? Izuku almost recoiled. What a strange question to ask. Most fans didn't care for the commission, but the heroes themselves. Some hardcore hero fans were fans of the school the heroes came from, but it was rare for anyone to think of the commission themselves. Sure, there were fans of Hawks that gave the commission credit, but Izuku listened to Hawks' interviews and could tell Hawks wasn't a fan of the commission at all. But his own opinion? What was his own opinion? He couldn't say he was a fan of the commission, but he didn't have anything against them yet. Izuku knew a company run by people with double standards when he saw one. He knew that when he became a hero, he'd have trouble with them. Being a formerly quirkless monster hero was bound to get him in all sorts of trouble with the commission. And one as morally gray as Izuku? If it were in the eyes of the commission, they'd think he was asking for trouble. His eyes drifted back to his phone, the question reading innocently across the screen. Why would they want to know? Deciding it was safer to ignore it and not paint a target on his back, he scrolled down. After replying to a few comments on his work and listening to his music, the angry energy finally subsided, and he found himself calm but still hungry. Giving up, he sighed and entered into Google, how to be confident? 6 months had passed since Izuku's quirk emerged due to dying temporarily in the slime villain's attack. He had gotten used to homeschooling and his appearance. He'd embraced the confidence and rage that came with the realization that he deserved better. Over the months, his analysis skills came in very handy for his quirk. He'd cleared the beach and people were visiting it again. Part of him didn't want people coming back to a spot they'd so easily thrown away. A place that became close to his heart, where he grew stronger and more confident in not only his quirk, but his own body. Gone were the thin, gangly limbs from before, and now stood a teen with muscles all over. The days spent lifting the junk and climbing over it helped him build up the body he needed to be a hero. Izuku used his tentacle arm to grapple himself to the tops of buildings, where he'd parkour from rooftop to rooftop, swinging through the sky like a spider on a web. His channel grew more popular. He'd been getting a lot of emails lately from pros asking him to stop because he'd been making their jobs harder by letting the villains know all their weaknesses. Izuku wasn't quite sure what to do with that information. As far as Izuku knew, his channel wasn't that popular. Why were so many pros having trouble? Were they just looking for someone to blame? He'd given up on hiding his look from his followers, after a few videos of people asking why he wasn't showing his face more than usual. Eventually he just gave in and turned his camera on, making a video about his recent change in appearance, without going into too much detail. Occasionally he'd get visions of his old classmates talking about him behind his back, but that faded away the more time he had spent away from the school. Eventually they just assumed he'd moved school. Since Katsuki wasn't in trouble, they realized he couldn't have told anyone about any of the bullying and suicide baiting. Izuku could tell Katsuki regretted it by the way he got visions of Katsuki up late at night, unable to sleep and grumbling to himself about how stupid he was to say that to Izuku. But just because he regretted it didn't mean Izuku was going to crawl back to him. He wouldn't think about it unless Katsuki proved to him that he could be trusted not to hurt him again. And since he wasn't coming forward with his past actions and trying to ignore them, even though they were close neighbors, it wasn't like Izuku saw him coming forward anytime soon. Right now Izuku was carrying a duffel bag on his back, standing on a train and holding onto the railing as it sped towards Hosu City. Today was the day of a convention, and he'd been invited along as one of the local content creators. He'd made his fans aware months in advance so they could prepare if they wanted to see him. He was excited to have his own stall, where he could sell a selection of quote stickers from his analysis videos and give out notebooks with his logo on them. He planned on signing a few for the people who asked. He entered the tall building-like warehouse and navigated his way through the line of convention waiters lining up at the door. Once he got to the front, he announced his name and got his badge, the guard letting him in and allowing him past the gate. Izuku stumbled into the building. The carpet was blue and had a stale smell, with stains of coffee and water lines along the edges of the walls. The steel beams in the ceiling were exposed, and Izuku passed several food stands on his way to his stand. He had an hour to set up, so he began by emptying the box of notebooks into a neat pile and sorted his stickers into piles so people could select which ones they wanted. There were quotes of several stutters and Izuku getting sidetracked in his rambles. A few images of his face frozen in a yell of surprise or blushing when someone compliments him. There was a few stickers of emojis from his Discord server that his fans had created, and he'd gotten permission to print and sell. He looked up and noticed a hero glancing at his stall unsurely, so Izuku did what he'd been practicing and made eye contact and smiled invitingly to the hero. The hero, Izuku recognized as a recently debuted Inki hero, with a quirk that allows them to control ink. Getting a determined look, they nodded to themselves and stalked over to Izuku's post. Heroes from the stalls across from them all gave side eye to the brave hero who decided they needed to speak to Izuku. All the heroes knew who Izuku was. He was popular, just not among the heroes. He'd been making their life more difficult by giving out analysis of their quirks and fighting styles on the internet, where anyone, including the villains, could access it. To say they weren't fans was an understatement. Though the rest didn't want to be the first to approach the boy at the stall, so this Inki hero Flo was brave for being the first to approach the boy who knew several ways to disarm and possibly kill them. "Can I help you?" Izuku smiled. Yeah, you can." They spoke, voice deep with insecurity. They took in a deep breath and glared. "Stop making videos about hero analysis." "I'm sorry." Izuku began, taking a step back from the person in front of him. "I am within every right to do what I do." The hero scowled, gritting their teeth. "You're putting us in danger." Izuku's face grew in disbelief. Time to let out some of that rage he was getting used to. "News flash, sweetheart. You're a hero. You're always in danger. It's your job." Izuku sassed. "My analyses are just analyses. What people choose to do with the information is their choice. I'm not putting you in danger. I'm showing you your weaknesses so you can overcome them. So you can work around them and get better. Besides, people love analysis of their favorite heroes. They want to be just like them." The hero shook their head. "You know too much. You don't understand how terrifying you are, do you? You've got us all figured out, and you're handing out how to kill us." The hero grimaced at the confusion on Izuku's face and stepped back. Just stop making videos, please. Before one of die by your hands. With that, the hero walked away and Izuku was left stunned. He didn't understand. His analysis weren't that good, they were just the ramblings of a fanboy. He didn't know why people enjoyed his content. Maybe it was time he changed what he was doing? Maybe it was time he included another group of people? He didn't need to change much, just enough to get the heroes off his back. He could still keep this lifeline, the thing that held him up for years after all the bullying. Something that made him look forward to escaping his bullies and getting home quickly. Time to introduce the villains to his analysis. Hours had passed of Izuku passing out notebooks, autographs, and stickers. He enjoyed spending time with his fans, knowing they appreciated his hard work. Before he knew it, he was out of things to sell and it was time to pack up his bag at the end of the convention. Izuku was walking through the streets, the lampposts were lit up in the darkness and the passing trains on the rails several feet above him hummed in the air, splattering brief light into the alleyways and buildings as it passed. The trains weren't constant, but they were a few coming into the city's main station. The station he was heading to, where he would be able to take the train back home. It was then Izuku heard a sharp yelp followed by a short scream for help, so being the hero wannabe he was, he rushed toward the alley the scream came from and peered inside. A woman, around 20 years, was being held by her throat and dragged backwards towards a large van, two back doors open, a person kneeling just inside the van, holding out an arm to grab the poor woman. Izuku assumed there was also a driver. Without much of a thought, he dropped his bag at the entrance of the alleyway. His right arm squiggles about like a limp noodle before bursting with an energetic force, showing a large purple tentacle. Shooting it forward and gripping onto a pole at the far side of the alleyway, Izuku pulled himself forward and let the momentum of his arm retracting itself pull him along the alleyway, foot first straight into the villain's face. He let go of the woman who stumbled to the side, before scrambling behind Izuku. "Run!" he yelled, not taking his eyes off the recovering villain on the ground, with bulging muscles and the villain in the back of the van with thorns protruding out his skin. Landing in a crouch, Izuku drew his arm back for a punch and sent a blow straight for the recovering criminal on the ground. A loud smack could be heard as a tentacle was slapped across the man's face and sent him reeling back onto the ground. "You brat!" yelled the guy covered in thorns, leaping toward Izuku. Izuku's vision blurred as an image popped into his head, the thorn villain punching him with an uppercut. Izuku leaped back to avoid the villain, who followed through with his move and rushed him, raising his fist for an uppercut, when Izuku dodged and wrapped his tentacle arm around the thorn-covered arm. Tiny cuts dug into his skin, but he ignored them in favor of twisting the man around and following the momentum as he swung the thorned villain into a brick wall. "Watch out!" screamed the woman, standing in front of Izuku at the alley entrance. Phone in her shaking hands. Another vision appeared, a man, the driver, swinging a metal pipe over his head. Izuku ducked under his swing and kicked his foot high behind him, resulting in the villain getting kicked in the chest and winded, dropping to the ground and the pole clattering to the wet alley floor. Izuku sent his tentacles soaring out, wrapping around the pipe and swung it at the villain struggling to catch his breath. The villain quickly got knocked out, like the thorn villain and the villain with the muscles. Izuku made his way to his bag with a quick pace as he heard sirens approaching. He didn't want to be here for the police to arrive. He's already running late for his train, now he'd have to use his quirk to get there in time and he didn't know the layout of the city well enough to use his quirk to swing there. He's just have to settle for running across the rooftops. He could avoid the busy crowds that way. "Thank you," said the woman, long blonde hair tied into a ponytail and wearing a gray pencil skirt suit and heels. "No problem, are you okay?" Izuku asked, hoping she wasn't hurt so he wouldn't have to administer first aid treatment. He'd definitely be late then. The woman smiled, "No, just a little shocked." Izuku nodded, turned with a wave and ran off into the darkness of the alleyway. Passing the idling van, he climbed up the fire escape of one building with dark red bricks and to the top of the gray steel beams. Reaching the roof, he heard the police pull over and ran for the next building, where he leaped across the gap and landed with a roll. He's happy to have practiced parkour over the last few months. figuring it would be a good exercise for the urban city and a good form of transportation. It also meant that Katsuki's little gang was annoyed, unable to chase down the now incredibly fast Izuku, and when following him into an alley they know is a dead end, being unable to find him. So far he hadn't been caught by any heroes, since most underground heroes who use parkour weren't patrolling at the times he was out and rarely do spotlight heroes free run across rooftops. On the inside, Izuku's head was going miles a minute as he went over and replayed what he'd just done. He'd committed an act of vigilantism. He was going to be in so much trouble if he was caught. Izuku didn't realize at the time, but this was the first time in 6 months he hadn't been starving. 3 more times has Izuku had to jump in to save someone in the last week alone. He really shouldn't. But his body was moving on its own, and with all the training he'd been doing he'd really been able to fight successfully. It helped that he could see the moves the villains were thinking about using. Figuring it had something to do with his ability to know whenever someone was thinking or talking about him. It was an odd power, but he couldn't complain as it literally saved his butt by predicting the villain's next moves for him. But now he was on his 5th fight of the week and he had to wonder if he was just being targeted. He ducked under a punch from a woman with knives coming out her knuckle joints and rolled towards her, springing up and punching her in the nose before sidestepping away from her hands as she instinctively clutched her nose and her eyes watered. The buyer got away earlier, but Izuku couldn't let the drag dealer continue to sell to teenagers. So here he was, doing the hero's job for them again. Really at this point he should just accept it and get his own costume. It was fun, and he's begun to notice that his insatiable hunger is actually fading. After 6 months of feeling nothing but rage and starvation for reasons he couldn't understand, though theorized the rage could be from years of mistreatment, the feeling of that hunger fading was thrilling. Maybe he needed to be a vigilante as much as the streets needed him. Izuku took a scratch to the arm as he almost got hit full force by the woman's claws. He really should be more focused on the fight at hand. Izuku grinned as he posted a video about the Villain Snatcher, a villain arrested and recently escaped prison. Analysis of his quirk had been fun. The ability to exchange places with any person around him was an interesting one. A shame he was using it for villainy. Izuku could come up with so many ways that man could help in hostage situations or rescue missions. But Izuku knew better than to judge a person based on their quirk. He was one of 2 perfectly good reasons not to, after all, being mistreated and abused for not having a quirk. While Katsuki, the other example, was never told no and what was wrong because his quirk was a powerful one, people just assumed he'd be a hero. Izuku has always seen the issues with today's society. The quirk discrimination, the villains, the heroes, vigilantes turning to villainy. Some say they make the worst kind. Maybe it's because they still view themselves as heroes. Maybe it's because they know the intricacies of how the system works. Izuku doesn't know, but he hopes he'll never delude himself into villainy. He rolled back in his chair, sliding across the floor over to his bed where he had laid out an outfit of clothes from his wardrobe. Most of it was new stuff he bought, trying to find a new style. Laying on his bed was a dark green turtleneck, sleeveless top. Just beside it was dark gray cargo trousers, with loads of pockets. Quickly he donned the costume. At the foot of his bed stood bright red lace-up combat boots, just like his high tops. Finally Izuku applied some black face paint, blotched around his eyes like a mask. He had his costume, now he just had to sneak out in the middle of the night and go looking for trouble. God, if his mother caught him he'd be so dead. Izuku was swinging through city. It was late at night, and he had just wrapped his tentacle arm around the head of a lamppost, ready to swing forward when he heard a struggle in the alley below him. Glancing down he sees 2 men, dressed in all black, carrying a briefcase that's hinge is broken and is spilling out notes of money. He grasps for the case lid and scrambles out the alley with his partner as they're chased by a large muscular woman in a suit. The woman pulls out a gun and begins shooting at the 2 men retreating into the shadows of the street, unlit by the smashed street lights along the road and abandoned by the people. Storefronts are damaged already, but the bullets flying through the air as she shoots do them more harm. A window of an old toy shop smashes and glass clatters to the ground, crunching under the feet of the man with reptilian scales across his face like freckles. Izuku swings down, behind the woman and drives his foot into the back of her head. She falls forward, feet struggling to find steady ground as her head drags her body down toward the ground. He kicks her gun away from her and under a dumpster. Izuku sends out an arm, stretching it out and around the two running men and dragging them back into the alleyway. The man with the scales swings his arm up, wielding a knife and stabs it into Izuku's tentacle. Izuku grits his teeth and squeezes the two men tightly as he drags them. The reptilian man tries to wiggle the knife around in Izuku's arm but fails to reach it with his arms now tightly pressed to his sides. Izuku swings them into a wall as he ducks under the swing of the woman, who when she couldn't see her gun around her, decided to rely on her strength. The vigilante backflips away and sends a kick up to her chest. She dodges and brings her elbow down onto his knee joint. Izuku grunts as he brings his leg back down, hopping as his knee adjusts to sitting in the right position again. Carefully he tiptoes around on the ground, bouncing on his feet to keep ready for the next hit. Izuku forces himself to put his weight on his injured knee with a wince and runs at her in a tackle, antlers at the ready. As he grapples her to the floor, his antlers scratch the sides of her ribs and tears a nasty gash in her side. She hisses, bringing her combined fists down on Izuku's back, trying to wind him. As Izuku tries to push himself up, hands firmly planted either sides of his target, her fists crash into his back and send him back on top of her, winded. His aggressor grins, cackles and begins to push him off. Izuku panics and following his instincts clamps his jaw down. Hard on her neck. She screams, coughing at the pain in her throat as her neck sluggishly bleeds. Izuku uses this as his moment to escape, her grip gone to clasp her throat. He grips a hold of the bars of a fire escape with one of his elongated tentacle arms and soars up into the metal nest. Upon landing on the railing, crouched and grasping the bars for dear life, he grins, bloodied teeth on show and spits out a red blob. The man grasping the briefcase full of money shrieks at the sigh of the horned monster, crouching on the railing of the fire escape several feet above him, half hidden in shadows making his green and gold eyes glow in the darkness. Izuku leaps down, landing on all fours and tilts his head to the side, making direct eye contact with the villain in front of him. With his long, disproportioned limbs he crawls towards the villain on the floor of the alley, leaning against one of the walls. The villain starts to breathe in deeper and Izuku crawls into the light, grins and licks his bloody teeth. The villain full-on starts sobbing, bubbles of tears making their way down his face and he starts to beg. "Please, I have a family." The statement makes Izuku stop, completely gobsmacked at the irrelevance that has to their current situation. And why was the man begging like his life depended on it? "Why should I care that you reproduced?" Izuku questioned, standing to his full height and stalking forward. The villain panics and pushes the briefcase into Izuku's arms, mumbling "take it over" and over again and begging with simple pleases. Again, Izuku is stupefied. Does this man think he can buy me? Izuku sighs, kinda disgruntled at the fact that the villain thinks that giving him money will get him to leave. Instead he pulls out zip ties from one of his many pockets and zip ties the blubbering man's hands to a lamppost. His unconscious partner is zip-tied to him, their wrists handcuffed together. Izuku limps over to where the woman has passed out after hyperventilating. The wound wasn't serious enough to do her loads of damage, but it was quite the shock factor Izuku guesses. He quickly zip-ties her arms behind her back and daisy chains her to the two men. Together they sit in a circle around the lamppost, wrists tied together by thick plastic. Izuku hears the police pull up into the street, so he kicks the briefcase into sight and begins his climb up the fire escape to the roofs. Upon reaching the top he shakes his leg to get some feeling back and runs across the rooftops for a long while, putting as much distance between himself and the crime scene as possible. It takes a while, but eventually he finds a roof with no door access and sits himself down on the ledge. Glancing at the knife still plunged in his arm, he winces and swears. "That's not good." He whispers to himself as he massages his knee and hears it click and pop before the pain fades a bit. Glancing at the time on his phone, securely kept in a zip-up pocket on his thigh, he sighs and decides to call it a night. Izuku races home, occasionally glancing over his shoulder to make sure he isn't followed by any underground pro heroes out on patrol, though he knows that in his area there aren't any pros patrolling. It's why the crime in his area was so high. All the pro heroes wanted to be where the limelight was, competing with each other. And there simply wasn't enough underground heroes around to have one in every district. Izuku supposes that's why he's run into so much crime lately. Upon reaching home, he climbs into his window and reaches under his bed, dragging out a clear box, filled with medical supplies he'd gathered over the years from all the abuse Katsuki puts him through. He gathers the things he needs to take care of the wound on his arm, before slowly pulling out the blade. He's glad he crumbled up a t-shirt to bite down onto when he pulls out the blade, unable to stop the small scream that happens as the blade drags across his skin. The adrenaline wearing off had only brought the pain into a heightened state. As shaky as his hand was, the stitches don't turn out that bad, and to be discreet he just slaps a plaster down over the top of the wound, instead of using gauze and wrapping a bandage around it like he should. At least he used antiseptic cream on the wound. Gross, he can still taste the blood in his mouth. Izuku was sitting at his desk, smiling into the camera, waving his hands around animatedly as he rambled about a villain with a bone manipulation quirk. The fact that he uses his quirk as armor is awesome. It makes me wonder how dense the bone is. Can he control the density? Perhaps it depends on how much his calcium intake is. Izuku stumbles over his words as he analyzes the villain. Suddenly he grins. By shattering his bones continuously, they'll eventually grow back stronger. Later he edits in a short clip of the villain from the news, editing in the side eye emoji when the villain smashes his armor against one of Ingenium's engine-powered fists. Izuku spins around in his chair, beaming with happiness. His smile is soon replaced by a large yawn. As he glances at the time, he realizes it's almost 11. So Izuku climbs into bed, ready to get at least 2 hours sleep before setting out on a patrol. He wouldn't have to worry about waking his mum tonight. She was spending the night out with Auntie Mitsuki, and usually crashes in their guest room after their hangout. Izuku awoke to an alarm 2 hours later. Slapping his hand on the present mic alarm clock, he stumbled over to his wardrobe, pulling back the clothes hanging up and sliding out a box. Inside the box was his vigilante clothes and shoes. He wanted to keep them out of sight of his mother, and decided to hide them at the back of his wardrobe. Donning his outfit, he pulled out the black paint and a sponge, and coated the top of his face and freckles with the paint, giving him an ominous shadow. Slipping out his window, he swung through the city blocks and ran across rooftops. His patrol was beginning to take notice to pro-heroes, who found the villains he'd captured and left for the authorities to deal with. Izuku perched on top of a rooftop ledge as a vision clouded his mind. An office, filled with papers of all sorts and a computer on the desk, an empty coffee mug, stained with coffee round the edges. There stood a man in a long, tan coat with dark hair. He had a detective badge hanging round his neck and spoke to 2 people. Izuku could recognize them without even trying, Present Mike and Eraserhead. There's a new vigilante I want you both to spread the word about him to your coworkers in your fields. Detective Tsukachi spoke, glancing between the 2 heroes across from him. Izuku glanced at the alleyway below him, checking for anything before leaping to the next rooftop and continuing his focus on the conversation that had to be about him. The villain we apprehended the other day was sobbing, begging. And the other villain had a very deep bite wound on her neck. Hizashi winced at that and cleared his throat when Shoyuta hid a small smile in his capture scarf. The first villain kept muttering about the dear god. He's afraid the vigilante will go after his family. We had to promise an officer at his family's door for the next day or 2 just to get him to tell us what happened. Izuku rolled his eyes at the apparent dramatic retelling of what happened, and the fact that the villain thought he'd go after his family was frankly ridiculous. The vision faded with the heroes agreeing to spread the word about the new vigilante, dubbed Dear God by the villains. Hour later Izuku was running over rooftops when he smelt smoke, and began making his way towards the blue flames overtaking a building. Parkouring down to ground level, he sees a man dressed in a long black coat, covered in nasty purple burns and staples. Dabi was standing admiring his work, occasionally adding to the fire that spread quickly through the office building. Seeing this, Izuku snuck up behind him, analyzing his quirk to be a very hot fire quirk. He's have to keep his distance if he didn't want to be burned, though he is sure he inevitably will be. Izuku ran forward, leaping up and wrapping his legs around Dabi's neck. Swinging his body down and around, he brought Dabi to the floor on his back. Izuku standing above him, knees bent. As he raised his fist to punch Dabi in the face, Dabi raised his hands and sent a wave of flames towards Izuku. Leaping back and away from the flames, arms raised to protect his face, Izuku stumbled and halted. The flames stopped and Izuku's arm warped into a tentacle which shot through the air and grasped onto Dabi's wrist. Pulling Dabi off his feet and dragging him forward, he was on his knees when he was forced to a stop. Before Dabi could raise his head to see his assaulter, a foot was flying down heel to the back of the head. Dabi collided with the ground hard. Izuku tensed and rolled to the side, hiding behind a dumpster in the alley as bandages hit the ground he was previously standing on. Izuku's eye followed the bandages into the darkness of the rooftops. Hidden behind the bars of a fire escape was the crouched figure of Eraserhead. Bandages shot forward again and wrapped around Dabi, who struggled against the bindings that left him laying awkwardly against the wall. Izuku dived from the dumpster as Eraserhead's capture scarf struck the ground Izuku's feet had just left. Standing in the middle of the alleyway, Izuku crouched into a battle stance and growled in Eraserhead's direction. Eraserhead leaped down, scarf at the ready, and shot forward. Sending out his capture gear to catch Izuku, who ducked under the scarf and swiped his leg out under Eraserhead's legs. Erased jumped, avoiding the swipe to his legs, and spun around to kick Izuku in the jaw. Izuku quickly caught Eraser's ankle and gripped tight with both hands as he spun them around and sent Eraserhead flying into the brick wall. Izuku readied his arm to swing away when his wrist was caught and yanked towards the already recovered hero. Eraserhead's eyes flared red and his hair started floating. Izuku felt his otherworldly vision fade, temporarily blinded and adjusting to only seeing with two eyes again. He was knocked onto the ground and winded as Eraserhead kicked him in the core. Unable to prepare for Eraserhead's attack before they happened, Izuku sent his tentacle arm out and punching Eraser in the face. Eraserhead looked bewildered. "I erased your quirk." Izuku cackled and grinned with too many teeth. Canines too long and jaw unsettlingly wide. Eyes stretched in madness and glee. "Guess I just have more than one quirk." Izuku was so glad. Finally he was getting a substantial meal. Izuku shot forward, flying through the air and landing against the wall, feet planted on the brick wall, which cracked under the pressure at either side of Eraser's head. Drawing back his fist, grinning in glee and ready to punch. A scream, shrill and loud, rang out through the street. Izuku stopped immediately and his nose twitched. Soon he was tilting his head as if using his ears to find the direction the scream came from. He sniffed the air and the scent of burning flesh filled his nose. His eyes immediately leapt from Eraserhead, once wide with glee turned serious as he used his arm to swing up to the fire escape and climb into the burning building through a window. Izuku grabbed a scarf from the desk of an office cubicle and tied it around his face, hoping to keep the smoke at bay. He knew he needed to be quick and ran through the floor of the building as he searched for the woman who had screamed. Passing by a fully glass wall, he saw her, curled up under the table of a conference room. On top of the table was a support beam of the burning building. Izuku tried to push the door open, only to see that it had been blocked by part of the support beam. He stepped back, glancing at one of the windows, and decided it was a better option. He raised his foot and kicked the window. It didn't smash, but it did shudder as his foot landed. So again he raised his leg and kicked the window, cracking it in the progress. The woman, hearing the kick and crack, looked up from under the table and saw Izuku. Glowing eyes and antlers, kicking in a glass window and rushing to her aid. Taking the scarf off of his face, he tied it around her mouth and nose, lifted her into his arms and rushed toward the wall of windows leading out into the street. Kicking the windows once again, they smashed under the pressure and Izuku looked down. "Are you the only one here?" he asked the woman, adjusting his hold on her. "No, I was just about to lock up, but the security guard works the night shift." She flailed her arms wildly and Izuku grinned in reassurance. "Eraserhead," he yelled, looking down at the man on the street floor. "Catch." With that, Izuku chucked the woman out the window, who screamed as she fell and ran toward where he assumed was the security guard's office. Eraserhead had been waiting on the fire brigade when he was knocked down by a man in a dark trench coat. He seemed to have burned the binding off of him and was running away from the scene. He heard his name and turned to see the vigilante holding a woman in his arms, flames liking the air around him as oxygen encouraged the flames to grow. Next thing Aizawa Shota knows is the woman is falling and the vigilante is running back into the burning building. Quickly catching her, he lowers her to the ground and looks back to the burning building, only to see the vigilante swing out of the building as the windows smash from an explosion further in the building. In his arm was a man dressed in a uniform. Izuku swung down to the ground and sat the man down next to the woman who he'd saved prior to the man. "Nice catch, Eraser," he chirped, backtracking his way from the scene. "Don't throw civilians, kid." He was tired. This whole exchange was tiring and the villain got away too. Tsukachi didn't know what to do. Eraserhead had explained and made a statement, filling out all the appropriate paperwork he'd been handed. What stuck with him was the fact that Eraserhead had said he'd erased the vigilantes, who Aizawa said sounded like a kid, Quirk. When asked about it, the kid had replied that he'd had multiple. It didn't make sense to Aizawa, but it made sense to Tsukachi. Was All for One behind this vigilante? But why would All for One help someone who was working actively against him? Wasn't All for One dead? He needed to call Yagi. Izuku sighed as he got back to his house. He smelt like smoke and it made his nose crinkle up in disgust and his toes curl. His arm, which had healed slightly after the knife wound he'd gotten, was now red with burns. He was going to have to treat those. Thankfully, he was well prepared for treating burns. Izuku stepped off his vigilante gear and headed in for a shower, scrubbing the scent of smoke off his skin and washing away the black paint around his eyes. He washed his hair and massaged away the start of a headache as he shampooed. He was careful to avoid getting too much soap in the wounds of his knife wound and now burns. They'd begun to blister. Once dried off and in pajamas once again, he put burn salve over the wounds and wrapped a bandage around them. It would do for the meantime. Izuku laughed as he watched a hero trip over a villain's quirk, a tripwire quirk, before the villain ran into another hero's grasp. He was on top of a building, watching a compilation of heroes making rookie mistakes someone on Twitter had compiled. Next to him was Eraserhead, eating a sandwich and drinking coffee out of thermos. "What you watching, kid?" "A compilation of heroes making rookie mistakes," Izuku answered, switching his phone off and sliding it into his pocket. Eraser shook his head, but Izuku could see the slight smile hidden behind his friend's capture scarf. They'd become friends not too long ago, after many times of them working together to apprehend villains in the 4 months since they met. At first it was because Eraser had been trying to capture him, and the best time to try was while he was distracted. That quickly changed after a heart-to-heart on a rooftop. Izuku was doing most of the heart-to-heart, bound in a capture scarf, somehow convinced the hero to leave him be. Eraser's main concern was why a kid was a vigilante and that's why he wanted him off the streets, but Izuku prevailed. In fact, he thrived, and since they started to work together, Izuku's made a friend in someone no one would have expected. It was a little awkward, the age gap was there, but Aizawa picked up on memes quite quickly as the younger of the duo explained them to him. Soon enough he was understanding the flow of every one of Izuku's conversations, better than his husband, who Izuku had met a few times when the two shared patrol times. Eraser and Present Mike had kept it quiet that they hung out with the vigilante every police officer had been trying to arrest for 4 months now, but Izuku somehow always gave them the slip. Some of his fans had even commented on his Discord about the new vigilante in Mizudafu. Izuku told them he doesn't do analysis on vigilantes since it's hard to get information on them. The excuse was complete horseshit. If anything, it was harder to get info on villains who weren't publicized so much. He just didn't want to do an analysis on himself. Izuku grinned as the rice timer went off. The rice had finished cooking and his mum would be home any second now. She had the next day off of work, so the two planned to spend the day together. At the moment, Izuku was serving portions of curry and rice into their bowls as the kettle boiled for his mum's favorite tea. The door opened, Inko humming a cheering tune to herself before announcing her arrival to Izuku, who in return called through to her as he placed the bowls on the table. Inko shuffled her slipper-clad feet into the room, grinning at her son who'd grown taller than her. He grinned as he accidentally bumped his antlers off a rail of hanging pots that hung above the kitchen island. Together they sat at the table, each going into deep discussion about their days to one another. Inko had finally got that bonus at work and had earned a pay rise. To celebrate, she was going to take Izuku out for dinner next Saturday. Izuku was telling her about passing a maths test he'd been studying for, and his upcoming English test, how he was a little nervous but was growing in confidence at the skills he was learning. After dinner, the two cleaned up together and snuggled up beside one another on the couch, holding bowls of ice cream. Izuku had mint chocolate chip, while Inko had strawberry. It was a quiet evening in the Midoriya household, but it was just what they liked. Izuku hung upside down from a lamppost as Eraserhead landed on the pavement below him. Izuku extended his tentacle arm down as he hung upside down and lowered himself to the ground, directly behind Aizawa. Izuku grinned before quickly clamping his jaw down on Aizawa's capture scarf and shrinking his arm back to its normal length. Eraserhead sighed, looking up as Izuku grinned with the capture gear between his teeth. "Give that back, problem child." He sounded tired, probably because he was preparing for the entrance exams to UA in a few days' time. "You're getting sloppy." The words were muffled by the scarf, but this happened often enough that Shoyuta could translate fairly well now. "You're drooling." Shoyuta deadpanned. Izuku let go of the scarf and dropped to the ground. Aizawa shook off his scarf before equipping it once more, and Izuku grinned as he wiped the drool off his face. "Come on, Eraser. I'm starving." Eraserhead sighs as he trudges along behind the younger boy, who was skipping down the street. Together they were an unlikely pair, a grumpy old man, he was only 30 damn it, and a youthful ray of sunshine. Of course, what really set people off was their ability to cause chaos together. Oh, can we please check on our moss graffiti? I wanna stick it to the commission with environmentally friendly warfare." Izuku begged, hopping up and swinging from Eraser's neck. "Sure, kid," Aizawa said as he adjusted his scarf around his neck to make room for Izuku, whose bones started to pop out and teeth started to grow. His face started to stretch into a muzzle as he shrunk down in size. In the beginning, Shoyuta shuddered at the sounds and the sight of Izuku transforming, but now he'd been desensitized to the boy's bones breaking and all the stomach-churning actions. Soon enough, a small cat, with stubby little antlers on its head and 3 eyes, instead of legs were tentacles with sharp rows of teeth instead of suction cups. He had spines down his back, which sharpened when threatened. For now though, the spines rest comfortable against Izuku's green and gold fur, as he wrapped himself around Shuta's shoulders and took a nap as the hero swung his way through patrol. Izuku grinned as he and his best friend sat at the top of the radio station Mike worked at. They were listening to Mike talk about the latest hero rankings in between songs. Izuku was snacking on some rice ball Shota brought along for him, when he paused. "Izuku, my name is Izuku Midoriya." He smiled and held his hand out to the pro hero, who looked at him in astonishment. Following that, he smiled and shook the kid's hand, Shoyuta Aizawa. Izuku handed him a piece of paper. On it was his phone number and home address. "In case you ever need a place to rest between patrols, or I'm not answering the phone and you're worried about me." Shoyuta smiled and nodded his head. "Do your parents know you're friends with an adult?" Izuku shook his head. "It's just me and Mum. She'll be glad I have a friend though." Shoyuta could tell there was a story there, but didn't push the kid any further. Izuku left for the night at around 3 a.m., leaving Eraser to head home to his husband. It was late evening. Izuku was snuggled up on the couch with his mother, both cradling tea in their hands as they watched a documentary on sharks together. He was planning on heading out on patrol once his mother was asleep, but judging by the way she was watching the documentary, it wouldn't be for a while yet. He loved seeing her like this, enjoying her free time, curled up in their homemade crochet blanket with a mug of tea in her grasp. Her hair was tied up in a messy updo. She was in comfy clothes rather than her usual pencil skirt and cardigan. Izuku was much the same, his hair still untamable and messy. He was dressed in some shorts and a t-shirt that said fridge on it. They were quiet as the documentary went on to show a scene on thousands of sharks feeding on a whale carcass. The front door swings open with just one kick. Rushing in is 2 men, who quickly grab Izuku and pin him down as he feels a prick to his neck. The muscular man drags him up. Inko is rushing toward a phone when she's caught by a man with no visible signs of a quirk. He holds her back and drags her over to the dining table. Izuku kicks the knee of his assaulter, and as it buckles, Izuku is swinging himself over the back of the couch and running for the man who just cuffed his mother's wrists and ankles to a chair. Raising his fist back for a swing, he stumbled and caught his side on the wall beside him. Ignoring the stumble over seemingly thin air, he stood up straight and swayed. Izuku looked down at his hands in confusion as he saw them begin to double. Before he knew it, Izuku was on his knees in the dining room and falling to the side unconscious as his mother screamed. Inko watched as they dragged her son up and onto a chair, cuffing his wrists and ankles to it also. "What do you want?" she yelled, rage pouring through her at the image of her son collapsing to the ground unconscious. The masked men didn't answer her. Instead, they took seats next to each other, across from her. She glared at them, trying to use her quirk to bring a knife from the kitchen to her hand. When she felt no tugging sensation coming to her, she paused. "Quirk suppression cuffs?" Inko took in a deep breath, glaring at the two before asking calmly this time. "What do you want?" One laughed. "We used to be big fans of your son's work. Till he started targeting us." Inko gasped. These villains had been watching her baby's analysis videos? She supposed it made sense. She wasn't naive. Izuku's analysis were very accurate. He could see all the little details people missed. It made sense that there would be villains who enjoyed his content solely because they could get information on how to defeat the heroes. That's why Izuku decided to even the playing field. "Let's get started." The muscular guy spoke. The other man nodded and opened a bag. Inko's head was forced back, the assaulter gripping her hair tightly. A cloth was placed over her face as the muscular man started to fill a large jug with water. "Remember, this is your son's fault." Inko screamed, before her screams turned into gargling as water was poured over her mouth. The villains grin as they take the cloth from her mouth and wring it out onto the floor. The other villain refills the jug with water. Inko is coughing, water running down from her lips and snot running out her nose. She's heaving in breaths of air as if she's running out. Perhaps she is. Her head is gripped tightly by her hair again. Tipping her head backwards, she felt the cloth on her nose and mouth, and the jug began to pour once again. Izuku awoke to pain, and the labored breaths of his mother, who sat tied to a chair opposite him. She was soaked, her t-shirt sticking to her skin, and her hair is wet and straggling down her face like she'd been dragged through a bush backwards. Inko's face is blotchy and red from crying, though pale from shock. Izuku's whole body feels like his whole body is on fire, though he can't see any physical damage. He supposes it probably had something to do with that needle in his neck. His body feels fuzzy, he's unable to move it with how heavy it feels. There's fire burning through his nerves and he can't stop the uncontrollable spasms his shaking hands have. His vision is clouded, but clearer close up, where he can see the man now approaching him. In his hand is a set of bolt cutters. Izuku tries his best to move once again, only to be stopped by the restraints around his wrists and ankles. The man grins, looks directly at Inko, who had just realized Izuku had awoken, and takes Izuku's pinky in his hand gently. "This is what you get for betraying us," he said, in some sick delusion that Izuku was ever loyal to villains. Izuku glares ahead when he feels the cold metal clamp round his pinky finger on his left hand. He grinds his teeth and meets his mother's frightened eyes when the pressure builds and the skin breaks. He refuses to scream as the muscles tear and the bone creaks under the force of the villain's grip on the bolt cutters. The villain recognizes the silence as a challenge and grins, sadistic gleam in his eyes. He refuses to scream when the bone finally cracks and shatters under the pressure. Instead, he lets out a breath of relief when the pressure is finally gone upon the pinky dropping to the floor, completely cut off. Blood spurts rhythmically from the wound, dripping and creating a splatter on the floor around the chair leg. "You sure are a stubborn kid." Inko sobs once again, gagging at the sight of her son's dismembered pinky finger laying on the floor. "Please, leave him alone." "I'll take it, just leave him alone." The men laugh, and the muscular on with the bolt cutters grins again, moving to Izuku's ring finger. It starts again, Inko screaming and Izuku's silent tears stream down his face as he loses yet another finger to the villain's strength. The challenge to make the boy scream under the weight of all the torture is thrilling for the villains. Once Izuku's lost all 4 fingers and a thumb to the villains, they decide to try a different method. The muscular villain tore Izuku's shirt down the middle, exposing his torso as the skinny villain with blonde hair strolled into the kitchen and took a knife out the knife block. No. No. Inko yelled as the villain approached her son again, flipping the knife between his hands like it was a game. Izuku spits at the villain's feet. He grins, "Bring it on." There's a growl through the air as the muscular villain backhands Izuku across the face. "Defiant little sheet, break already." Under his fringe, Izuku smiles. Finally something wasn't fuzzy feeling, something he could willingly move. Eraserhead stood on the rooftop of Mick's radio station. It's where he and the dear god now named Izuku had arranged to meet for their nightly patrols. Maybe he was UST running late, but Eraserhead felt that something was off. So after the 3rd missed call, he started making his way towards the apartment. Hopefully everything was all right. Eraserhead leaped over a gap between buildings and landed with silent, experienced feet. Izuku tilted back until he was falling with so much force that the chair broke underneath him, freeing himself from the cuffs attached to the chair. Cuffs dangled from his wrists and ankles as he charged forward, ignoring the way his stomach cramped as he moved, injuries sluggishly bleeding out from the shallow cuts. Izuku tackled the muscular villain to the ground, grappling on the floor as he punched the villain in the face, using the other end of the cuff as a brass knuckle. Izuku was dragged off by the blonde, so Izuku flipped around and unhinged his jaw. Wider! 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 Enclosing around the man's arm, which was entangled in tentacles coming from deep within Izuku's throat. The villain struggled to free his arm, trying to scramble away. Inko watched with wide eyes as her son clamped his jaw shut around the man's forearm. The villain screamed as blood sprayed out from the gap between Izuku's lips. He grinned. "Izuku!" Inko screamed, watching with tears in her eyes as the muscular villain recovered and drew a large serrated knife from his boot. Izuku tore his maw away, taking majority of the arm with him. It was too late, the knife was already drawn across Izuku's throat. Izuku choked, grasping his hands around his neck to stop the blood flow. He dropped to his knees. "Izuku!" cried Inko, sobbing as she tugged against the restraints. "Get up! We need to get out of here!" The muscular villain said through his bloody nose and missing teeth. The blonde nodded his head, grabbing a kitchen dish drying towel and wrapping it around his stumpy arm. The muscular villain stalked over to Inko without a look of remorse. Izuku is in a gargled breath, blood spilled out of his mouth, dripping onto the floor and pooling around him as he curled up in the fetal position. Inko's eyes never left Izuku's as he stopped visibly breathing. "Izuku," she whimpered, turning her glare on the man walking towards her. "You goddamn monster. I hope you burn in hell." He laughed, "Sure will." He swiped the blade along her throat. She coughed and choked as blood poured out the wound and down her clothes. Inko's drifted her eyes back to her son and steeled her resolve. She would not cry in the face of death. She would not give these monsters satisfaction. Inko took her last breath with her final thought, "I'll be with you soon, my baby boy." Eraserhead approached the apartment with caution, unsure what to say should Izuku's mother answer the door. As Eraserhead approached the stairs leading up to the apartment floor Izuku and his mother stayed on, he noticed blood drops on the stairs and sped up, hoping he was just being paranoid. He was hoping Izuku hadn't been injured fighting crime before meeting him, then returned home due to the injuries. As he approached the door, he noticed it was slightly open. It also had a large boot print cracked into the door by the handle. Profession kicked in and he pinged Tsukachi his location with the request to bring an ambulance. The door creaked slowly as he tapped it and it swung open on the bottom door hinge. It wobbled back and forth. Shoyuta got his capture weapon ready as he entered the building silently. To his right was the living room, with a coffee table toppled over and smashed mugs puddled in tea on the floor. A homemade crochet blanket was left strewn out over the couch without caution. The landline was on the floor, screen shattered. He stepped into the kitchen. Iron and copper. Izuku's mother, who he had heard so much about over the last few months, was tied to a chair, soaking wet and dripping blood. Tear-stained and immortalized with a look of longing on her face. Across from her was a smashed-up chair, and nearby was the fallen body of one Izuku Midoriya. Eraserhead rushed over, careful where he stepped, and checked for a pulse on Izuku. It was weak, but it was there, so he grabbed a bundle of his scarf and used it to put pressure on Izuku's bleeding neck. After a moment, he checked Inko for a pulse but found none. Sighing, he returned to his friend's side and put pressure back on the wound. Shortly after the police arrived, followed by an ambulance. Tsukachi soon took charge, asking if Eraserhead knew anything that had happened. No, I was supposed to meet Izuku earlier. When he didn't show up, I made my way here to check on him. I saw blood on the steps and the door smashed in, so I pinged you. Shoyuta sat in the hospital waiting room hours later, after filling in pages upon pages of paperwork. He was sick and tired of waiting, he just wanted to see his friend. But he knew the importance of waiting, of what Izuku was going through, and that it was best not to rush the procedure. He knew Izuku didn't have his father in his life. Now that his mother was gone, he wouldn't have any family. He didn't want Izuku in the system, not when he could take him in. With his fostering license it could be done, he'd just need to talk to Hisashi first. Pulling out his phone, he slumped down in his seat and rang his husband. Hisashi answered within a few rings. "Hello, wonderful husband speaking." He began, the grin audible. Shoyuta let out a small smile. "Can you meet me at the hospital?" Hisashi's grin was gone in seconds. "Are you hurt?" he asked, waving his college over. A muffled, family emergency was explained to his co-workers. Shoyuta could hear him shuffling around with his bag and coat as he gathered them. "No, Izuku is. His mother dead, villains attacked their home." Shoyuta responded, tightening his fist around his bloodied capture scarf. He heard Hisashi gasp and heard the echo of his voice as a car started and the call connected to Bluetooth. "Is the little listener all right?" Hisashi asked, voice low with concern. Shoyuta paused for a moment, remembering the scene he'd entered. Tsukachi said it himself, it was clear they were tortured. He shuddered and takes in a deep breath. "He's in surgery. It's going to take a while." Hisashi nods his head absent-mindedly as he drives, forgetting Shoyuta can't see him. "I'm on my way." Hours had passed. Shoyuta and Hisashi had been waiting in the waiting room for 3 hours now. Shoyuta was napping in his sleeping bag which Hisashi had brought in from the car for him. Hisashi was playing a game on his phone. They discussed taking him in, but since they both live on school grounds at the moment for their jobs, they'd have to get permission from Nezdu. So they decided to work on an email together once they knew Izuku was awake. A doctor approached. "Are you the guardians of one Izuku Midoriya?" "No, I'm the pro-hero who found him." "I see." She spoke. "Well, he's out of surgery if you'd like to see him. He's asleep but should be awakening soon. You can wait in his room, I'll guide you there as we talk." The two stand, gathering their belongings. Shoyuta shuffles out of his sleeping bag and rolls it up with quick precision. He seems to be healing quickly. Does his quirk have a healing factor? She asked, and Shoyuta shrugged. Probably if he's healing quickly. It was only logical at this point to guess that he must have. She nods, and Hisashi takes Shuta's hand in his own. His throat's been stitched up after some surgery. It looks like a main artery was slashed, judging by the fresh scarring on the tissue. However, it's been healed over. His neck will probably heal over quickly too if that's the case. She continued as she led them through a locked door into the pediatric ward. The cuts are shallow, though the carving of the word traitor had to be stitched and will likely scar. Hisashi winces. A child to be permanently branded with a word like that is horrifying. However, his hand is something we could not fix. I'm afraid he'll have to adjust without having any fingers on his left hand. Shoyuta grimaces. He knew how much Izuku liked to analyze on the go. How was he supposed to hold his notebook while he writes in it now? She stops outside a closed door in the middle of a long hallway. Balloons are painted on the wall, with animals wearing circus clothing and performing. There are penguins balancing on huge yoga ball and elephants with comically large ears flying. Each are wearing little conical cats in bright colors. It's childish, but it is the children's ward. Together they enter Izuku's room silently, tightly grasping each other's hand for comfort. Hisashi gasps at the sight of the young boy and tears build up in his eyes. They weren't close, but this was just a child and Hisashi had always had a soft spot for kids in need. Shoyuta on the other hand was stumbling forward, letting go of his husband's hand and sitting on the seat next to the boy. He grasps Izuku's non-injured hand and rests his head on it. "I'm so sorry, kid. I should have come found you sooner," he whispered, openly crying in front of his husband. Hisashi had only seen Shoyuta cry a few select times. He'd seen a few tears spill out at funerals for heroes he'd worked with, who'd died tragically at the hands of villains or trying to rescue someone. Specifically if they died after being crushed. But Shoyuta wasn't letting out a few small tears. Shoyuta was sobbing. Just like he had sobbed when Oboro was crushed under that building all those years ago. Hisashi remembered that day like the back of his hand. It would never not be painful. He and Shoyuta lost their partner that day, and sometimes Hisashi felt that he'd lost not one but two soulmates that day, due to how reserved and cold Shoyuta could be sometimes. But he dealt with it, he understood. Because no one else could. He loved him even though it was hard sometimes. Just like he knew loving himself could be hard for Shoyuta. It was hard to be a duo when you were meant to be a trio. Hisashi shuffled over, kneeling down to Shuta's side and rubbed his back as he cried. He didn't try whispering comforting words to his husband, knowing that in this state he wouldn't hear him. So he worked on calming him down, so he could remind him that this wasn't his fault. When Izuku awoke, it was to quiet snores and the beeping of a machine. The snores were comforting, knowing someone near was relaxed and safe enough to sleep. It reminded him to stay calm, that he wasn't in immediate danger. The beeping, however, was irritating. So he opened his eyes and groaned. The groan sent a sharp pain through his throat and his eyes shot wide with shock as he remembered everything that happened. Izuku shot up into a sitting position looking around frantically. Hey, relax. You're with me, Shoyuta." Izuku turned to face his best friend with a look of fear on his face. Besides Shoyuta was a snoring Hisashi, slumped in a chair with an empty coffee cup loosely held in his hand. "Acid show." Izuku paused, hand gently grasping his neck. "Don't talk, you're still hurt. But don't worry, you're healing fast and soon enough you'll be able to ramble to me all over again." Shoyuta tried to comfort him, gently prying Izuku's hand away from his neck and gently massaging it with his own hands. "Mom," he whispers as Shoyuta reaches for the cup of water on the table next to him. He pauses and purses his lips in a grimace. "I'm sorry, kid, she didn't make it." Shoyuta hands the cup to Izuku as he says this, making sure to hold eye contact with him. Izuku tears up and with a shaking arm reaches up, until he realizes his fingers are gone and lets out a weak whimper. Shoyuta guides Izuku's right hand up to the plastic cup and gently guides the arm to his mouth. "Drink, it'll help your throat." Izuku nods to gently. It was almost missed, but he drinks from the cup. Trying to take big gulps, but Shoyuta would remove the straw from his reach and remind him to take slow sips. Hisashi awoke to this scene and reached for his phone to begin his email. "Dear Nezdu, Shoyuta and I are using our emergency foster license and we're wondering if you'd allow for a child to be staying with us in the teacher's dorm due to our apartment being so far away from the school. His name is Izuku Midoriya and his mother and him were targeted by villains. We do not know why yet as the police haven't been able to question Izuku. We'll update you further later if we need to. Hisashi Yamada and Shoyuta Aizawa." Before sending it, Hisashi nudges Shoyuta and passes him the phone. Shoyuta reads it over and nods in agreement and Hisashi presses send. "Izuku, there's a detective I work with who wants to question you about why the villains attacked. His name is Tsukachi." Shoyuta speaks, shifting to glance at the door, where he knows Tsukachi will appear at any moment due to the text he'd received only hours ago. They sat in silence for a moment while Izuku drank the water slowly, and Hisashi grasped Shuta's hand for a squeeze of reassurance. There was a knock on the door. Tsukachi entered the room with a grim smile. It wasn't reassuring and Izuku felt his toes curl in anticipation under the thin paper like sheets of the hospital. "Izuku Midoriya? I'm Detective Tsukachi. I'm here to ask what happened to you in your home." Izuku nods his head, The detective pulls out a voice recorder and a notepad and hits record. Izuku watches as he does this, recognizing the man from his visions but unwilling to share that aspect of his quirk. Just some general questions to confirm your identity. He starts. Are you Izuku Midoriya? Izuku nods his head. Yes. True. Were you born on July 15th? Yes. True. Shoyuta shifted his foot and pulled the chair closer to Izuku's side, taking his right hand and rubbing a thumb over the younger boy's knuckles. Tsukachi nods to himself and takes in a deep breath to prepare himself. Do you know why you were targeted? Izuku paused, eyes blurring with tears. Yes. This came as a surprise to Hizashi and Shoyuta, both thinking it had something to do with his vigilantism, that his identity had been figured out and he hadn't told them. Or possibly he'd even not realized his identity was released into the villain's grasp. Can you tell me why? Because my analysis. They watch my analysis videos, they figured out my identity and didn't like that I started doing analysis on villains. They called me a traitor. He paused, shaking his head. I was never on their side. I'd never help a villain willingly. We know that, kiddo. Shoyuta reassured him and Tsukachi nodded. Truth. Tsukachi said for the sake of the recording. Is that why they carved the words traitor into your chest? Yes, he wanted everyone to know I wasn't trustworthy. The question continued for a long time, till they got the whole story from Izuku. Detective Tsukachi was uncomfortable with the level of detail Izuku told the story in, including when he mentioned losing control and eating the arm of one of the villains. He had to note Izuku's record with cannibalism, even though it wasn't technically him in control. Shortly after noting it down, he went over the options he had. We could send you to community service for a few months, since you didn't kill the man and were out of control. Or we could use the villain rehabilitation program UA has. He's not a villain. Hizashi growled, Shoyuta glaring at the detective. Izuku shrunk back on himself, reverting to the way he used to be due to an overwhelming night he'd had. I know, it was an out-of-control quirk, but technically that puts him in criteria for rehabilitation. If UA takes him in, they could train that instinct out of him. I know you're both a teacher at UA, perhaps you could put a word in for him. Nezdu grinned as he stared at the screen. This kid was a genius, and he needed him in his school. He sent a reply to Hizashi and Shoyuta. I want him as my personal student. Izuku spent a couple of days resting in the hospital. He didn't like his options given to him by the detective. But Hizashi had taken the detective aside and they seemed to come to an agreement. What that was, Izuku didn't know yet. But the good news is that there was another new aspect to his quirk. He knew he could heal fast. What he didn't know is that he could regrow limbs. The doctor speculated that it had something to do with the arm he ate, giving him the energy to regrow the fingers on his left hand. Though he did have thick ugly scars ringed around each finger and thumb. Shoyuta and Hizashi had to work, so Izuku spent the days on a games console in bed and writing analysis on heroes and villains in his notebook the two had bought for him from the gift shop. Izuku would get out today. Shoyuta and Hizashi said he got to live with them until they found a better solution. He was grateful, of course, but it was a bit strange moving in with his best friend and his husband. It was the end of the day when Shoyuta arrived. He was smiling gleefully and it gave Izuku shudders down his back. What did you do to them? He asked, concern in his tone. What? Can't I just smile? No, you did something. Izuku responded, crossing his arms and raising his eyebrow. A logical ruse. Shoyuta gave in. Izuku's face morphed from concern to a grin of his own. Shish. They are not feeling fly like a G6, are they? Nope. Shoyuta said, popping the P. The two cackled, and that's when Hizashi walked in, the detective trailing behind him. Hizashi paled. Run. Just run. He whispered before fleeing out the door. Tsukachi shook his head. How was he going to react to this when the three lived together? The detective smiled at the two. Izuku gave a small wave in return. I have good news. He paused. Who will take you on? Nezdu has a letter for you here. He passes Izuku a large envelope, who tears it open carefully and out slips a circular device. Izuku presses the button on the top and a hologram appears. It's Nezdu. Greetings Izuku Midoriya. I'm the principal of UA Academy, and upon seeing your analysis of villains and heroes online, I'd like to take you on as my personal student. Izuku blinks in shock. Nezdu's personal student? That would put him in UA, but in a very powerful position of UA, taught by the fellow feral being. Of course, should you refuse, you'll still be placed in the general education course and living on campus as our ward for protection from villains who may want to cause you more harm. Izuku was practically vibrating in his seat as he nodded his head. I want to be his student. He grinned. Tsukachi smiled. We're hoping he can help you with figuring out if cannibalism is necessary. Izuku distractedly nods his head as he listens to all the things Nezdu says. Tsukachi notices but only smiles at the boy's excitement. I can tell you now, since he's announced you as UA's ward. Shoyuta says, but Nezdu and I are now your guardians. You'll need our permission to leave campus, and usually one of us would have to attend, or you keep your location on and update us of any location changes. Izuku nods his head attentively. You'll stay in the staff dorms with Hizashi, and I will decorate your room together once we're out of the hospital. Shoyuta continued. Izuku, excited, smiled and nodded his head. Izuku grinned as he stood under the archway of the school entrance. UA, his dream school, had accepted him. Though Izuku couldn't help but wonder if the circumstances were different, would they still let him in? Shoyuta by his side, he was escorted to Nezdu's office before classes started. Shoyuta would need to be there for his homeroom class. Just because he didn't expel anyone yesterday doesn't mean they couldn't slip up today. Izuku, Hizashi and Shoyuta have a running bet to see how long it takes before Shoyuta is given no choice but to expel someone in his class. Izuku and Shoyuta bet it would be fairly soon, while Hizashi wanted to have faith in the students. It would be his mistake. Izuku made it to the door of Nezdu's office. He was nervous and a little afraid, to be honest. Nezdu was a genius. How was he supposed to keep up and study under him? A wave of determination flooded over him. He's just have to try his best. The door swung open, seemingly on its own. The room was dark, lit up solely by the computer screen at the desk. The desk chair had a high back and was facing away from Izuku. He couldn't see if anyone was sitting in it. Izuku crept into the silent room, keeping his body ready for a surprise attack. His nose twitched as he took in the scent of Earl Grey tea. A voice came from beside him. Izuku, not expecting it, jumped with his tentacle arms swinging out to protect himself as he leaped backwards and away. There was a crash, and in the darkness as everything settled, Izuku's eyes adjusted as they glowed. His freckles lighting up also. Stood in the middle of the room was the rat principal of UA High School. He was holding the handle of a teacup, offering it to Izuku, who had the rest of the teacup smashed into pieces on the floor surrounded by an amber puddle. In a flash, Izuku's arm was back to normal and his glowing eyes held fear. Principal Nezdu, I'm so sorry. He waved his arms around frantically in his apology. The rat bear thing only grinned as the lights flickered on and Izuku was temporarily blinded and had to screw his eyes shut to rub his eyes. I suppose I shouldn't have snuck up on a vigilante, but I wanted to test your reflexes. Nezdu spoke as he hoisted himself up into his desk chair. Standing on the seat, he stretched his arm out wide and grabbed onto the table. Izuku gulped. He shouldn't know about his extracurricular activities. Slowly, Nezdu pulled himself round to facing the right direction, while Izuku was having a small mental breakdown. Here's the deal, young student of mine. Nezdu grinned, folding his paws together and looking Izuku directly in the eye. I am really looking forward to teaching someone as smart as you, so we can keep the vigilante business on the down low if you join one as hero classes so you can get a license. You can also spend the PRs I'm not teaching you as. He hums and haws at the correct words to use and he strokes his chin. Security. He grins. You can be extra security, free to use your quirk should anything breach the school's security system. Izuku stared at the chimera as he questioned everything. You won't arrest me? Nope. He hummed, sipping his own cup of tea. And you want me in the hero course classes so I can get a license? Yes, you did very well cleaning up the streets. I look forward to seeing you as a pro. Izuku nods, understanding what he meant, and while confused, he wasn't going to say no to becoming a pro hero. "And in my spare time, you want me to guard the school?" Nezdu nodded. "You're practically a tank. You have free rein to defend the students as you see fit. Although, I'd hold off on eating anyone till you digest that arm." Izuku had the audacity to turn red. Thinking it over, it wasn't a bad deal, and protecting the students meant he could still get his fill in food. Food being enough chaos and strife. What more likely to cause chaos and strife than a high school? Other than a villain attack, that is. God, think how stuffed he'd be during exam season. "I'm in." His face was determined, and as Nezdu grinned, he slid a gray uniform across the table with a badge on top that said security, along with a comm system. Where the comms at all times, you can communicate with the other staff this way. Oh, how Izuku was going to mess with Shoyuta. "You're free to go, explore the school and such. I don't expect you here till 12 for yacht classes." Izuku nodded, grabbing his stuff and skipping out the room. He went to the nearest changing room to change from his casual clothes and into his new uniform. Folding the clothes neatly and placing them at the bottom of his bright yellow backpack, he set up the comms system and pinned the badge to his tie. He decided to explore the outside first, checking the fields and the forests for any point of weakness, but more or less just enjoying a stroll. It wasn't until Izuku was in the forest, halfway up a large tree for a better view, that he noticed Eraserhead. He could see him through the window on the 4th floor, talking to his students. About what Izuku didn't know, but his scarf was floating as was his hair, and the students looked terrified. Izuku grinned. He had a wonderful idea. Swinging over, he planted his feet onto the wall and dug the teeth of his tentacle arm into the wall for support. Gently, he knocked on the window. All eyes in the room darted to him, all confused except for 2 pairs of eyes. One was angry and slightly confused, while the other had the look of resigned acceptance. Aizawa slid open the window, and Izuku decided to perch on the ledge. "What are you doing here? Are you stalking me?" Shoyuta asked. The class glanced between them. Izuku cracked a grin. "I wouldn't dream of it." Aizawa hums in disagreement. "I wouldn't put it past you, cannibal." The class grew confused or shocked expressions at the insult, as Izuku's face comically stretched into a look of pure betrayal. "I ate that arm in self-defense, good sir," he belted out dramatically. "Oh my God." Someone muttered in shock as another student gagged. Izuku grins as he climbs in through the window. Disproportionate limbs reach the floor and Izuku stretches to his full height. His arm twitches and bursts back into a human shape. "Hi, I'm Izuku. I'm a new member of staff and a friend of Eraserhead's." He looks scary, but he's a big softy underneath. Izuku grins with too many sharp teeth. Katsuki blanches at Izuku's appearance and stutters over the word staff. "Problem child, what are you doing here?" Aizawa spoke, questioning in his head why Nezdu had made the problem child staff. "I'm the new security guard. I don't start for a few days, so for now I'm just exploring the grounds. Figured I'd come introduce myself to all my newly adopted siblings." Shoyuta groaned. "They're not your siblings." Izuku laughed. Some of the students pushed themselves away from the source. "Oh, you won't adopt them all?" Izuku sighed, then grinned. "Wanna bet money on that? I'm not gambling with you, problem child. Get out of my class." Shoyuta spoke tiredly. Izuku only nodded and hummed, glancing at the children in the class. "I can't wait to take hero lessons with you all. Toodles." He backs up to the window as he speaks, bumping into the ledge and allowing himself to fall backwards out the window. Shoyuta doesn't bother rushing over to the window to check if he's okay, but most of his class does. "Where'd he go?" Siro asked as he scanned the outside of the school building. "What the F happened to that nerd?" Katsuki yelled, turning and glaring at Eraserhead. Aizawa only raised an eyebrow. What was that supposed to mean? Izuku grinned as he swung his legs back and forth on top of the "put your hands up" radio station. He was skiing and chewing on his hoodie sleeve, a habit he's had since he was a child. Aizawa landed beside him, noticing his best friend's hoodie sleeve covered in holes from where Izuku's 2 sharp teeth had worn them down. "You're nervous?" Shoyuta asked, sitting down beside Izuku and bringing out a thermos filled with soup. Izuku hums, Today went well, really well. I get to go to my dream school, and I get to help by being security when I'm not being taught. I get to live with my best friend, which is awesome by the way, 'cause you're awesome. Izuku pauses and looks to the sky, holding back tears. I just wish my mum were here to see it all. Shoyuta hums in agreement, reaching up and burying his hand in Izuku's thick bush-like curly hair. I'm taking the day off in a couple days, for the funeral. The invites will be sent out tonight. Hizashi is posting them now. He can't come with us, someone has to cover for my class, but I'll be with you. Okay. Izuku smiles to himself, thanks Dad. Aizawa turns to stare at him, and Izuku's head shoots up. I said thanks man. Thanks man. Izuku was a blushing mess, which is a sight because he was bright red with glowing eyes and freckles, and wasn't that just odd? Aizawa looked away, closing his mouth from gaping at the child, and sipped his thermos. Izuku was staring at his hands, practically vibrating from embarrassment. Once Shoyuta finished his thermos, Izuku and him decided to patrol the streets. Leaping from building to building, scanning each alleyway as they went, Izuku couldn't help but overthink his recent slip-up. Gods, he was a mess, wasn't he? Izuku jolted to a stop, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Eraserhead paused beside him. What's wrong? I smell blood. With that, the two were carefully making their way into the alleyway, silently. Crouched low to the ground and breathing quietly, Izuku couldn't smell anyone else in the alleyway over the scent of all the blood. Approaching the body, Izuku checked for a pulse while Eraserhead went further ahead to check the back of the alley. Clear. No pulse. Body's cold. Sheet. As Eraserhead was calling it in with Tsukachi, Izuku was searching the body, who looked to be in a hero costume. Not one he recognized immediately, so likely to be a newer hero, fresh out of school. Izuku let out a small when he pulled a license out of one of the utility pockets. Hero name, Digitizer. Quirk false reality. Interesting, Izuku would have loved to do an analysis on a quirk like his. It would be pointless now, however, he was dead. Lacerations all over his body. His throat was slit too, probably what actually killed him judging by the depth of the wound. Police are on their way, Izuku. Eraserhead warned, watching as Izuku had his hand, blood-covered, halfway to his open mouth. Izuku made eye contact, and the two stared at each other for a moment, before Aizawa leapt forward to grab his hand, while Izuku was quicker and put his hand in his mouth. Stop eating the evidence. Eraserhead hissed. Izuku lets out a muffled scream, hand still in his unhinged jaw, as Shoyuta shook him fiercely. Izuku yawned, stretching out his tentacle arms, little pin-prick teeth scraping along the top of Eraserhead's capture scarf. He was in his cat form, curled around his best friend's shoulders. He was walking down the corridor of UA, homeroom just begun, and a few straggling students were eyeing him and Izuku like a new art piece in a gallery. One everyone was judging fiercely. But an art piece nonetheless. Aizawa slid the door open with a little too much force as it slammed against the wall, but sue him, he was up all night with paperwork for a murder investigation. Izuku was lucky, as a vigilante he didn't have to do paperwork. And yet here he was, sleeping on Shuta's shoulders, instead of beginning his patrol around the school. The class stare carefully at the creature in front of them, on top of their homeroom teacher's shoulders. All right, registration. Aizawa grumbles, ignoring the chuffing of the cat as it snuggled its head further into his neck. He began calling out the students' names, who all answered in varying degrees of questioning. Sensei, you are aware that we are not allowed pets on campus? Ida asks, chopping the air with his hands. Aizawa calmly looks up from his paper and replies, he is not a pet, he's my partner on patrol. They paused, slowly nodding. Because that cat wasn't something they wanted to question. Especially when it yawned and unhinged its jaw in a way that showed off multiple rows of sharp-pointed teeth. Homeroom went on, trying to ignore the vaguely looking cat-like creature in the room. Until it stretched out, tentacles reaching out far across the room and then levitated off their teacher's shoulders. The room went silent. Off on patrol? Aizawa asked. The cat looked back over its shoulder and into the eyes of their teacher's own eyes. Slowly, and one at a time, each of the three eyes blinked and he floated out the room, levitated just inches above the ground, tips of the tentacles dragging across the floor. Aizawa slid open the door for him and nodded as he left the room. Collectively the room let out a sigh of relief. Aizawa looked to them all as he shut the door. "You lot don't like him very much, do you?" A few had at least the decency to look away guiltily. Aizawa smirked. "Don't let him hear you say that." Izuku stood alone in a whitewashed room that held no decoration. The walls had a coat of white paint, but you can faintly see the gray stone coloring underneath. In the center of the room was a bed, a dresser, and a desk, all covered in plastic tarp to protect it from any dripping or flying paint. And with Izuku helping, there would be flying paint. He smiled. Shoyuta and Hizashi were going through so much effort to make him feel comfortable. But all he wanted was his mum's homemade blanket, the crochet one they snuggled under the night of the attack. He'd have to ask for it later. Yet he appreciated the effort though. Shoyuta and Hizashi appeared in the doorway. Shoyuta was carrying a can of paint and a few paintbrushes, while Hizashi had his hands full with boxes. Together the three of them got to painting the room a gentle sage green. Hizashi was the creative one and painted little leaves up the skirting boards and door frame. Once the room was done, he'd go back over the door frame and paint on little flowers in a baby blue. The furniture was dark woods and Izuku wanted his salt lamp from home on his desk. Since it was an active investigation, they couldn't return to his mother's home, but Aizawa was able to gather a few things one night with Tsuchiwaki's help. With the painting done in one afternoon, the windows were left open to air out the room and dry the paint quicker. The bed was pushed against the wall once the paint was dry and the salt lamps were plugged in on the desk and on top of the dresser. His mother's crochet blanket, which Tsuchiwaki kindly let leave the house, sat comfortably on his bed. Izuku spent the night on the couch, unable to stand the smell of the paint, while Shoyuta and Hizashi sat either side of him and watched a movie until Izuku dozed off. The two headed to bed after tucking him in with the crochet blanket and one of Shuta's cats, Dr. Frankenstein, snuggled up on Izuku's feet. Izuku shuffled around in his new room. He'd had it for a couple days now, and as he stood facing the mirror on top of the dresser he sighed. Trying again to retie his tie. He never could do it neat. Growing frustrated after the sixth try he tugged it off, and threw it to the ground. It cracked in the air as he threw it from the force. Izuku walked over to the wall and slid down it, burying his face in his hugged knees and combed his hands through his unruly bush-like hair. His nails dug into his scalp as he ground his teeth, eyes blurring and wet as white sparks danced across his vision from the pressure behind his eyes. "Kid," Shoyuta says quietly, standing in the doorway. He's dressed in a suit, his hair up in a bun, but as he moves towards Izuku, who looks up at him with blurry eyes, he notices the capture scarf would tightly round his arms. "I can't do this. Not today. It's too soon." Izuku cries, rubbing his eyes with his shaking hands. Shoyuta kneels down in front of him, gently taking his hands away from his eyes. "You can," he states. "You will for her." He's stern with his words, but Izuku can hear the softness to them. He knows he's saying that because he needs it to ground him, he needs to believe it to do it. Izuku takes in a deep breath, matching Shuta's, and nods slowly. Shoyuta lets go and lets Izuku wipe away the tears. The two head to the funeral. It was held in the funeral home by the cemetery. Inko wasn't a religious person. She hadn't planned for her funeral either. She died too soon for that. Shoyuta and Hizashi had asked Izuku questions about what he thought his mum would have liked and organized it for him. So laying in a dark oak casket, buried under dozens of bouquets and wreaths of floral arrangements, Izuku said his final goodbye to his resting mother. The funeral was beautiful, if a little awkward with the Bakugos present. Mitsuki couldn't stop crying. Masaru was trying to get her to calm down and keep her quiet while Katsuki stood in silent seething anger. Once the funeral was over, they approached Izuku, who nervously awaited their approach. Shoyuta was away thanking people for coming. Mitsuki smiled at him with bubbles of tears in her eyes. She wasn't surprised by his appearance. Inko had told her all about it and Masaru had heard too from the two women. "Izuku dear, are you safe?" was Mitsuki's first question. She didn't know his living arrangements after all. He nodded, giving a small smile. To the two adults he saw as family. I have 2 new guardians, well 3 unofficially. Only one of them could attend though. I'll introduce you to him once he's free. Masaru led them to a little table in the restaurant they were having the gathering at after the burial. The 4 of them sat around a circular table, tucking their chairs in and helping themselves to the mini sandwiches and tea to drink. Mitsuki glanced at Masaru, who shook his head at her, but she ignored him, her curiosity too hard to resist. What happened to Inko, Izuku? She asked. Katsuki turned to Izuku also while Masaru winced at the question. Izuku went silent and looked to the tea curled up in his hands. Some villains didn't like my analysis on them. They found our address and broke in. I got knocked out before I could fight back. When I came to, they had tortured her. Mitsuki and Masaru both choked back a sob. They both loved Inko to pieces. Katsuki's teacup exploded, gaining some attention from those around them. They waterboarded her. Once I woke up, they left her alone. Started torturing me. I tried to keep them distracted so they would ignore her. Katsuki's eyes went wide at the thought of both his auntie and Izuku being tortured. Anyways, they chopped off my fingers and then they realized I could move again after I tried to fight back. I had the upper hand for a little bit. I bite the guy's arm clean off. Swallowed it. They panicked and slit my throat and then mums. The 3 of them looked at Little Green on the face. You ate his arm? Katsuki asked. Yeah, I wasn't really in control. Izuku stated awkwardly. How did you get your fingers back? Masaru asked, eyeing the thick scars around his fingers. I can regrow limbs with enough energy. That's why my body ate that guy's arm. It needed the energy to regrow my fingers. Izuku explained, a little light in his eyes. Mitsuki dumbly nodded. When did you get a quirk? Katsuki quietly demanded, eyeing the markings and antlers. 10 months ago, when I was caught in a villain attack. It was trauma-induced. Masaru winced at the reminder of the slime villain that hospitalized him and had Inko worrying for months. The 4 of them sat in silence for a few minutes, processing. Izuku noticed Shoyuta lingering a short distance away, at another table, helping himself to a sandwich. Let me introduce you to my guardian and best friend. Izuku said brightly. He turned to Shoyuta and called him over. Katsuki's face was shocked and Izuku giggled at the look of pure horror. Best friend? Mitsuki asked, eyeing the man in front of her. Yes, he's a pro-hero and Kachin's homeroom teacher. Izuku informed. Shoyuta nodded his head. Nice to officially meet you both, Mr. and Mrs. Bakugo. I'm Katsuki's homeroom teacher and one of Izuku's official guardians. Shoyuta spoke. My name is Shoyuta Aizawa. How did you 2 meet? Mitsuki asked. Izuku and Shoyuta side-eyed each other, before Izuku chuckled and waved his hand, irrelevant. What's important now is that I'm safe, right? Masaru nodded, muttering and of course while Mitsuki and Katsuki both paused and watched them carefully. How the F, did you get a job, Deku? Katsuki asked. Izuku paused, while Mitsuki and Masaru scolded the boy in front of them for being disrespectful at Inko's funeral and insulting Izuku. Well, I'm a student at UA too. I'll be in your heroics classes. But while I'm not in classes, I'm security on UA grounds. Izuku informed, ignoring the insult of Deku. The catch-up went well, especially with Katsuki behaving. Shoyuta and Izuku headed back to Shuta's home and Izuku crashed in his bed, like Shoyuta, for a nap before patrol. Izuku grinned as he helped a woman stand up. Behind her was the sound of struggling and cursing. Izuku kept the woman's eyes on him, while keeping an eye on the mugger behind her as Eraserhead handcuffed him and freed him from his capture scarf. What's your name, ma'am? Izuku asked, holding her shaking hands and smiling at her reassuringly. Under the black face paint around his eyes you could faintly see glowing freckles. Ito. Anzu Ito. She replied, glancing over the eye on his forehead which blinked. What's yours? She asked quietly, still in shock. Izuku grinned, sharp teeth on show. She was comforted but a little unsettled. I don't have a name yet, but I heard the police and villains calling me the Dear God. She paused, that was an odd reply. Though she could understand the dear part of his name. Izuku leads her out of the alleyway and onto the street, where he sits her down on the curb of the path and takes a seat next to her. "You're all right now, promise?" He reminds her, "Tell me, what's your favorite food?" She pauses, dazed eyes turning to meet his. She's confused. "I like fresh pasta." Izuku grins, "Oh, I've never had fresh pasta before. Any recommendations?" Eraserhead guides the struggling mugger out the alleyway and into the street. The woman's eyes drift over to the criminal, but Izuku distracts her with blabbering about different types of pastas he's looking forward to trying. It's the morning and Izuku's in the principal's office, with his other guardian in the middle of class. Nezdu is having him work on analysis since he'd already passed all his high school level maths and English. Class is however just about to end when Izuku gets a text from Shoyuta to meet him in the teacher's lounge for lunch. When the bell goes, Izuku leaves Nezdu's office with a grin on his face and a promise to complete his analysis on the heroes they were studying. Izuku enters the hallways, filled with students on every level but this one, and makes his way towards the teacher's lounge on the same floor as Nezdu's office. When he enters, he hears the chatter of Mike with Midnight and Snipe, something about Mix radio show and the guest star. 13 is with Hound Dog, sharing lesson plans. Izuku's eyes drift over them all, before he finds his best friend and father figure, wrapped up in the corner of the couch, quietly drinking from a food pouch. Izuku rolls his eyes and strolls up to him, snatching the pouch from Aizawa's hand and dumping a paper bag on his lap. "Honestly, as the responsible adult, I shouldn't be the one making sure you eat proper meals." Izuku snarks, Shoyuta just groans tiredly and opens the bag, taking out sandwich. Izuku takes a seat on the couch beside him and tucks his earpiece back into his ear. He then gathers up his rice ball made by Mike the night before and begins to tuck in. Shoyuta pouts at the fact that Mike gave Izuku the leftover rice ball, with Shuta's favorite toppings, and gave Shoyuta a lousy sandwich. Some husband he was. Maybe he should file for divorce. He knows he'd get Izuku in the split. Hopefully Dr. Frankenstein would choose him, but Mick's always been the doc's favorite, so he might not win him over. Shoyuta supposes he is a stealth hero. He could steal Dr. Frankenstein from Hisashi. Make it seem like an accident. Oh no, the window was left open and Dr. Frankenstein got out. He grins. Izuku, seeing his face, shuffles to the other side of the couch and follows Shuta's eye line, directly to Hisashi. Izuku yawned as he walked through campus. It was hot. Sure, the gray was cooling, but cargo trousers and a skin-tight long-sleeve top weren't the coolest thing he could be wearing right now. He dreamed of getting home and soaking in a nice cool bath, then charging into some shorts and cuddling up in the sun with Dr. Frankenstein for a nap. Izuku paused as he noticed a high-speed spec heading towards him. Frowning, he reached for his earpiece and contacted Got Ready to report a student using his quirk without supervision. Help! Well, that idea went out the window. Izuku ran towards him as the student, it was one of Shuta's, skidded to a halt. There are villains in the USJ. Izuku's eyes widened, reaching up to his earpiece. Code, I repeat, code all heroes to the USJ stat. Izuku speaks clearly as he eyes Ida for injuries. Anyone injured? Not that I know of. Ida replies. And you? Izuku asks. No, I'm fine. Izuku nods. Head to Nezdu's office. Stay there until he tells you it's safe. Ida nods and takes off running in the direction of the school, which is miles away. The teachers were going to need some form of transportation to get there in time. Izuku would have to go ahead of them. Taking off at full speed, Izuku runs and rapidly approaches the doors of the USJ. I comes into sight. Izuku doesn't slow down, instead he speeds up. Crashing into the door, swinging it off its hinges and rolling to a stop at the top of the stairs leading down into the main section of the simulation joint. There are students around, he can see them fighting in the distance, trying to get to the center of the joint as quickly and safely as possible. Izuku also sees Shoyuta getting his head crushed under the weight of a monster. Rage boils over. His eyes glow, unseen in the daylight. Pupils turn to slits. He watches though, doesn't want to rush in too quickly without information. He needs to analyze. He sneaks forward, staying low to the ground and ready to pounce should he be seen. But he isn't. He crouches behind a rock and listens. The monster is taking orders from the blue-haired villain. So is the mist villain, though the mist villain seems to be giving advice too by the sounds of it. The blue-haired one is in charge. Leaping into the center of the fight, knocking the monster aside, he stands guard in front of Shoyuta. He makes direct eye contact with the blue-haired villain and growls ferally. Hurt my father and I'll see the marrow out your broken bones like jelly. Red eyes light up with recognition. Deca joined the heroes, huh? Shoulda known with the way you started analyzing us villains. Turning against us. He yells the last part. Izuku growls lowly and prepares to strike. But it's okay, I'm still a fan. Shigerakiri speaks. He glances to the side where the monster stands without orders. Beat him until he can't fight back. I want to take him home to analyze recruits. Izuku's glare switches to the Nomu and snarls. Spit flying out in front of him as his sharp teeth grind against one another. The monster leaps forward, Izuku leaps too. Meeting it in the middle and punches it across the face. It does nothing. Izuku blinks and ducks under a swing from the Nomu and swipes its legs. He tumbles but gets up quickly. The two circle each other before the Nomu launches itself forward and grabs Izuku's torso. Izuku kicks the air but gives up on the wriggling once he realizes it's too strong to shift. So he uses his teeth and goes to take a bite. It roars as teeth plunge deep into its thick skin and through the muscle. Incidentally dropping Izuku to the floor, who leaps and targets the exposed brain by taking out his sharp claw-like fingernails and digging them into the brain. The beast roars again and shakes his head rapidly, knocking Izuku off and tumbling to the floor. He rolls to a stop and onto his stomach. Looking up he sees the brain repair itself and scowls. He needs a way to damage it without giving it a chance to heal. Images flash through his head of how he could achieve that. He could cut out the brain, but he's unsure if it wouldn't just grow another one. His eyes slid over to Shigerakiri. He could take out the leader, but it might take orders from the mist villain also. It probably also has some sort of protective measures in place. Izuku groans. He's going to have to use his new move. He hasn't had a chance to use it yet. Shoyuta loves it, even if he only just got used to the cat form. Besides, Izuku is hungry. He's used up a lot of energy in these attacks and he's going to use more transforming and holding that form. He's going to be starving. Slowly, disproportioned limbs stretch out. Fangs drop from Izuku's elongating face. Claws form on his fingernails and his back arches as it snaps. Shigerakiri watches in horror as this boy, who he's admired for his analysis, snaps and pops and grows in size until eventually something's vaguely canine in shape appears. Taller than the Nomu, and with several rows of shark-like teeth as it opens its mouth in a yawn. It curls around Eraserhead, who is barely awake at this point, holding only because the boy he's come to view as a son is standing over him and growling protectively and he's afraid he's going to lose control. Hungry is growled out and Shigerakiri steps back in fear. We need to retreat, advises Kurogiri. Izuku lunges at the Nomu and bites down on its side, shaking his head with the Nomu in his mouth and it's clawing at his lips and roaring in agony, but Izuku doesn't care. It hurt his father. They targeted children. They don't deserve to live. Izuku tosses the Nomu aside, into the side of a cliff where spider web-like cracks form around its body. It's trapped but only for a little while. It's enough time for Izuku to approach and eat the leaders though. Don't. Shoyuta begs, seeing the intention in Izuku's eyes. The students that were scattered across the simulation joint arrive. Bakugo has gathered them. Up judging by the fact he's leading them. They're terrified at the monster in front of them, slowly making their way towards the two villains. Kurogiri is quick to teleport them further away while Shigerakiri orders the Nomu to kill this monster. A fist launches into Izuku's face and he slides back, towards the students who scatter at the beast skidding towards them. A few students, Bakugo leading them, sneak into the fight to move Aizawa to safety. Which Izuku notices his eyes meet Shura's. With his eyes, he's begging him not to lose control. Izuku doesn't know if he can hold on to control for any longer. He might just give in. Shoyuta looks at him with determination and Izuku is reminded of all the times together where Shoyuta has told him he can do something, that he is capable. So he tries harder. He opens his mouth up wide. He needs to finish this. He aims for the Nomu. He needs to stay in control. For his dad. Rapidly, tentacles reach out and grasp around the Nomu's body. The doors slam open and Snipe is taking a shot at the villains. All Might is making his way down the stairs. Dragging, the Nomu is being dragged. Fast, and then his jaw snaps shut and he swallows. No more Nomu. All Might makes his way over to Izuku, holding his hands up to subdue the boy in monstrous form. He's familiar with this form. Nezdu told him what to expect. That doesn't mean he's ready to face an outraged child. He never was good with children, ironically. Simply destroys himself with awkwardness. Izuku growled as All Might made his way over. All Might held his hands up like he was approaching a wild animal. Izuku shook his head, trying to get rid of the thoughts of danger and pain the man brought up in him. This was the man who crushed his dreams. This was the man who told him quirklessness meant useless. He may not be quirkless anymore, but a decade of trauma doesn't just disappear. Calm down, young Midoriya. All Might tries, glancing behind him to see the students being moved towards the entrance where they are carrying Aizawa and 13 out on stretchers. Izuku snarls and launches forward at the man, stopping short of reaching him in warning. You'll see Aizawa as soon as you transform back. But you can't go up there like this, you'll scare the children. Izuku stops and seems to consider this. You're to protect the children, not scare them. Remember. He coaxes gently. Izuku huffs out a breath onto All Might's face as he towers over him. All Might grimaces at the smell of blood that hits him and the creature shrinks back down to teenage size. Izuku doesn't even look at him before he's running off in the direction of the class and his father figure. Upon reaching it, a few students notice him and look relieved to see him not injured. He pushes past them and to the front of the crowd, ignoring the huffs and yelps of surprise as he pushes past them. Finally, he collapses down to his knees and shuffles forward to the stretcher on the ground. He lays his hands on Shuta's shoulders and gently shakes them, forgetting all his medical training he picked up through the years. Kid, don't shake him. Snipe says as he kneels down to Izuku's side. He's not breathing. He's not breathing. Izuku yells. Snipe sighs. He is breathing, he's gonna be alright. No, please don't leave me too. Class 1A stares in silence, watching Izuku shake and cry over Shuta's unconscious form. Mr. Aizawa has a son? Denki asks quietly, while watching as Snipe gently pulls Izuku away from Aizawa, who reacts violently to the touch and starts hyperventilating. I suppose he does. Replies Mina, watching as Snipe gently tries to get Izuku to listen to him while he talks him through breathing exercises. It isn't until Bakugo marches up from the front of the class, who tried to pull him back, and to Izuku's side. Oi Deku! He shouts, getting a flinch out of Izuku. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. Breathe out for 4 and hold for 4 again. Got it? He doesn't get a reply from Izuku, but he starts exaggerating his breathing for the boy he's kneeling in front of anyways, and slowly Izuku catches on. They do this for a few moments before Present Mike rushes over, skidding to a halt on his knees after dropping to them mid-run. He holds Izuku close and strokes his hair, while whispering that Shuta's alright. The class are coaxed by a returned All Might to continue on outside, and Aizawa and 13 are lifted by medics to the ambulances outside. Izuku isn't sure how long he sits curled up into Hisashi's side, but the older man doesn't leave him, even when he could be with his injured husband. What if Dad dies? I can't lose another parent. Not again, Zashi. Izuku cries out. Hisashi hugs him tighter at the thought of losing his husband. Just like Izuku, unable to bear the thought of losing another parent, Hisashi can't bear the thought of losing another soulmate. Aizu, he's gonna be alright. Let's get you home, alright? We'll go visit Sho tomorrow. Hisashi promised. Izuku nodded his head and let Hisashi guide him up and out the building, past the students and the police gathering up the apprehended villains. He bundled Izuku up in his big yellow bomber jacket that had the "Put Your Hand Up" radio's emblem on the back. Izuku snuggled up in the back seats of Hisashi's car. The ride back home was quiet, neither having the nerve to talk nor listen to the radio like usual. The ride was shorter than expected, probably because neither of them were fully there in the moment. Instead, wrapping their head around the disaster that the USJ trip had been and the results that affected their family. Izuku dozed off in the back seat, curled up and snuggling into Hisashi's jacket. It smelled like home and he missed home. Hisashi doesn't bother to wake the boy, instead unbuckling him and lifting him up and into his arms. He kicks the door closed and heads up to the front door, shimmying the keys out his pocket while balancing the teenager on his arm. Thank God for all the weightlifting he does for fights. Izuku sniffs in his sleep and lets out a little huff of breath. Hisashi frowns and enters the building, taking Izuku straight to his room. He feels the boy's forehead and notes he's a little warm, but that could be from all the adrenaline he had in his body. He slips the boy's shoes off his feet and tugs the jacket free, before pulling the blankets up and over the teenager and letting him sleep. Hisashi awoke to the sound of vomiting in the middle of the night. He glanced to the side of him and noting that Shoyuta was still asleep. Shoyuta had signed himself out of the hospital, against recommendation, and had Hisashi come pick him up from the entrance around 11 at night. He tried to wake Izuku, but the younger slept through any attempts of rousing him. Dr. Frankenstein was awoken abruptly from where he lay on Izuku's back, glaring at Hisashi for moving his bed. So Hisashi had left the boy to sleep, and went to pick up his disaster of a husband, who was waiting for him, in a full upper torso cast. Both arms broken near the shoulder, bandages around his head, he could only see through a gap where one of his eyes showed. They'd went straight to sleep as soon as they got home. But now it was 2 in the morning and he could hear the distinct sound of vomiting. Shoyuta was next to him and it sounded too big to be Dr. Frankenstein. So that meant that it was Izuku. Hisashi was out of bed and rushing to the bathroom in an instant, where he found his kid curled up in a ball on the floor, clutching his stomach and groaning in pain. "Aizu?" he asked, kneeling down next to him. Nose scrunching up at the scent of iron and sickness. "Hurts," the boy whimpered. Hisashi frowns and places a hand on the boy's forehead, sweeping away the sweaty curls. "Where does it hurt, Green Bean?" Hisashi asks, thinking it to be the boy's stomach, but unsure as he rubs the boy's back in a circular motion. "Tummy," he grumbles before he's shooting up and ducking his head toward the toilet bowl and throwing up. Hisashi sees the distinct color of red and takes a look in the bowl, to see congealed blobs of blood mixed in with the boy's breakfast. Hisashi's eyes widened in panic, before quickly retrieving his phone from his bedstand. He's quiet enough to not wake Shoyuta, but as if sensing his husband's panic, his eyes shot open and looked directly at the man. "What's going on?" He sleepily slurred, trying to wake up, not usually this unalert because of the high dosage of medicine he was on. "Izuku's sick. I'm calling Chiyo." Hisashi answered while the phone rang. In the background he could hear Izuku throwing up more and Shoyuta, upon hearing it too, tried to get up. "Get back down, I'm handling it." Hisashi hissed at his injured husband. Shoyuta rolled his eyes and kept trying to push himself up. Before he could stand, his body grew tired and he slowly lowered himself back down. He groaned in pain and Hisashi sighed, moving away from his husband. "It's 2M Hisashi. This better be an emergency." Chiyo's tired voice came through the line. "Izuku is throwing up blood," Hisashi said in a worried voice, thanking his training to stay calm in a scary situation. Shoyuta tried getting up again after hearing that, but failed and growled to himself. "Bring him in, I'll meet you there," Chiyo said and hung up the call. Hisashi nodded to himself and rushed through to Izuku's side. "Hey Green Bean. I'm going to take you to see Granny Chiyo." Hisashi spoke, combing back the boy's hair. Izuku groaned but nodded his head. He'd met Chiyo before, she'd been in the staff lounge berating Shoyuta for not eating proper meals. Izuku was impressed with the tiny woman's ability to get Shoyuta to eat a real meal rather than one of his jelly pouches. Only a select few could do that. Once again, Izuku was picked up and carried in Hisashi's arms to the car. He buckled him in and began the drive to the school, where he knew Chiyo will already be heading and get there before him, due to being closer. In Hisashi's opinion, the journey was too long. The usually quick travel to UA's school was taking its sweet but time. He was getting frustrated at the fact that he'd had to leave his husband home alone when he was in need of help, but also because his husband couldn't be there to look after the boy they'd come to look at as a son. Izuku groaned in the back seat, clutching his stomach and whimpering in pain. Hizashi skidded to a halt in his usual parking space near the door and made his way out the car, and round to Izuku's side. Throwing the door open, he dragged the boy out by the legs and lifted him up into his arms. "You're gonna be okay, little listener. I swear." It's part of their training to never make said promises, to be careful with their words. But he wasn't a hero right now, he was a worried parent. And no amount of training can make a parent calm when their child was throwing up blood. Shoyuta would tell him he was being irrational. But then he'd do the very same thing and be a hypocrite. So Hizashi opened the front door to the school, and as he entered the hallway leading to the front desk, he saw Chiyo rushing toward him with the medical bots beside her. "Zashi, it hurts." Izuku cried as he was placed on the gurney, where Chiyo began to walk towards the infirmary with he robots following. Hizashi made his way forward when a small creature stepped in his way. "Hizashi, go take care of Shoyuta, I'll take care of the cub." Nezdu spoke, resting his left paw against Hizashi's leg. "But..." he started, beginning to prepare an argument. "No, but Sko. He's safe here, and you both can come visit." The rat-bear-dog thing interrupted. Hizashi goes to argue, but a raised brow from the chimera was enough of a deterrent. "I'll be back tomorrow afternoon, I'll bring Shoyuta." Hizashi grumbled, loud enough for the possible stout to hear but still quiet enough to be a grumble. Nezdu nodded and Hizashi went on his way. Nezdu made his way up to the medical suite and found Chiyo taking a blood sample. "Got anything so far?" Nezdu asked. She sighed, shaking her head. "Nothing obvious. I'll be running tests for a while. If you'd like to stay, there's a chair by the bed." Nezdu doesn't say a word as he climbs up and onto the chair by Izuku's bed, where the boy had his eyes tightly closed as he growled lowly to himself. "What hurts, my boy?" Chiyo asks, running a hand over the boy's sweaty curled covered forehead. "Stomach. Feels like close. Scraping. Trying to get out." He struggled, writhing in pain and gripping the cloth of the sheets tightly. Chiyo and Nezdu look at each other. What's the probability of it being a literal something trying to claw its way out? With his special diet. "Hi." Nezdu replied. "Like the Nomu?" Chiyo asked, running her hands over the boy's stomach to feel for anything. She looked down and saw a hand pushing against the skin. Sharp by the sounds of it as Izuku screamed. "Ah," she said, stunned. "This is a first for her. We need to get it out." Chiyo demands. "We need to find someplace to hold it first. I'll call Tsukachi and see if we can get a squad down here with a transport vehicle. I'll request some heroes too for security." "Where will you send it?" Chiyo asked as she prepared a sedative. "Isengard." Chiyo looked at him in surprise, but nodded in agreement. When Izuku awoke from his restless sleep, he felt ill. His stomach was cramping up and he could feel the claws begin to come back in fold. Izuku groaned, he felt pathetic. He'd outlasted torture, but a stomach ache was too much to handle? His eyes drifted over to the seat next to him and he noticed the little white ball. White ball? In a suit? Oh, Nezdu. Why was Nezdu here? Chiyo waddled over, her needle-like cane next to her giving her support. "Good morning, Izuku dear." "Mornin', Granny Chiyo," was muttered incoherently. The older lady noticed his dazed eyes and smiled. "We had to give you a sedative to help you sleep off the pain and settle the Nomu you ate." "Waff," he mumbled, confused. She smiled and rubbed his curly hair, before turning towards the chimera in the chair, who was now sitting up. "Good morning, boss." Chiyo greeted. The chimera smiled gently and nodded to her. "Tea," he offered. Chiyo nods her head once and Izuku watches as the man pats the boy's fur-covered hand gently and slips off the chair and out the room to make tea. By lunchtime Izuku had brightened up and he was on the phone with his dad and Zashi. Shoyuta had explained that he was going to be spending some time with his other guardian till they were both better. Izuku was sad and quiet anxious. He hadn't spent much time with Nezdu yet, and Shoyuta talked about him like he was some sort of monster. Izuku could tell it wasn't a disrespectful name-calling, more of a slightly fearful name-calling. Still, the name monster resonates with him. Memories of villains screaming monster and that one guy who had police protection because he was terrified he'd return. It makes Izuku laugh, but monster always stuck with him. "Izuku." Hisashi spoke through the call and Izuku looked back up to the screen where Shoyuta and Hisashi were looking at him. Oh sorry. Spaced out. Shoyuta nodded. I got you a gift, it arrived while we were at the… You'll get it when you come home, okay? Izuku's eyes lit up. Really? Thank you. Shoyuta and Hisashi smiled. They were good parents. Maybe it's time to reconsider Zashi's name. Izuku said his goodbyes when Nezdu walked back into the room, carrying a tray of tea, a deep amber rippling across the teacup-held liquid. Nezdu smiles and decides to tease the boy. I'm your guardian too. Why don't I get called Dad? Izuku flushed and looked down. Nezdu chuckled. Here? He hands the boy his tea. My own special blend. Izuku takes it gently and brings it to his mouth, carefully inhaling the botanical earthy scent, with something else he just can't put his finger on. He takes a sip. Blood. Izuku looks at the rat alarmed. I am a carnivore, pup. Just like you. Izuku nods and takes another sip, enjoying the warmth in his hand and the feeling of his core warming up with the drink entering his system. A few minuets of silence before Nezdu spoke up again. What would you like to do today, pup? Izuku frowned. He didn't have the energy to do much. He wanted to analyze the next hero though. He'd heard of a hero making their debut not too long ago. Can we analyze? Like a hero? He paused. Nezdu's eyes seemed to light up. How about I give you a villain to analyze? There's a spark in his eyes that screams danger, but the eldritch in Izuku thrives on the feeling and he smiles innocently instead of grinning like his father. The boy nods his head and Nezdu grins, setting his teacup down and sliding off the chair. The gap between his feet and the floor was enough to make his feet slap off the ground with the force. Nezu shuffled towards the door. I'll be right back, I have the perfect villain in mind. Izuku nods idly as Nezdu disappears, glancing down at his phone to see his Discord server pinging with a discussion in the Quirk Theory channel. He decided to read the texts and follow the discussion, though decided against typing anything in reply as he was still a little too tired for socializing. Breathing in, Izuku took another sip of the tea Nezdu made for himself and Izuku. It was nice, earthy with a hint of botanical. He wasn't sure which plant though, something sweet. Maybe hibiscus? He likes hibiscus. Specifically with peach tea mixed in with it. Maybe he can convince Nezdu to stock hibiscus and peach tea in the staff room. It's nice and quiet there, the staff are so chill with him. Snipe likes to talk to him and Zashi in English because none of the other teachers are as fluent, so it's what they use to gossip about other staff. Izuku smiled as he remembered Zashi's joke about a cat and a canary. Izuku didn't remember how it went, but he remembered giggling away with Zashi grinning proudly and Snipe shaking his head. His heart feels warm at the memory, just like it did at the memories of listening to Zashi on the radio while he sat on top of the radio station with Shoyuta. Yeah, Izuku thinks. I think it's time to call Zashi something new. Hours into the analysis of the case Nezdu brought him, a case about traffickers. They'd been working on finding the base location of these human traffickers for about half an hour now, when Izuku grins and pings an area on his laptop, which pinged the same area on Nezdu's. I think here is a solid suggestion. Izuku spoke, letting Nezdu zoom in on the area of the map. Large, dimly lit and hard to get to. The only way through the tall gates is with a keycard. One of the staff at the docks is probably a trafficker. Probably working nights as security. It's the only way I can think of them so freely getting in and out. And quirks? Nezdu asked. Nothing I could get from what we have. Unlikely they have anything like a warp quirk. We can see that they use the cargo ships for transport. Izuku winces and grasps his stomach, which clearly has a hand pushing at it. Izuku grimaces. He feels like a character in a horror movie. He wonders if he's the protagonist who survives or one of the diversity cast that gets brutally murdered. He's probably the diversity cast. How Nezdu arranged it so soon, he didn't know. But here he was, sitting in a wheelchair pushed around by Snipe, in front of an entire group of pro-heroes and task force of armed SWAT. It was actually a little intimidating. I want my dad. Then there was the prison transport van. The doors were open so Izuku could see the huge chains connected to the bench and wall inside. He gulped. Logically he knew he wasn't going in there. But he can't help but wonder if one day someone were to decide he was a villain too, would they lock him up like this Nomu? Snipe stops with the group, Izuku along with Nezdu and Recovery Girl, a short distance from the pro heroes and SWAT team, all of whom looked too serious to deal with one of Izuku's awkward jokes. Okay Izuku, we need you to let the Nomu out. Nezdu speaks cordially. You mean, cough it up like a cat with a hairball? Izuku bluntly asks. Izuku please. Chio scolds. Izuku purses his lips, pushing himself up from the chair after gripping the arms and getting to his feet, a little unsteady as he wobbles. He stumbles forward, clutching his stomach. Snipe goes to take a step forward to help him move, but Nezdu grasps the end of the man's long jacket as he notices the cracking of Izuku's bones with his advanced hearing. Snipe pauses and looks towards the small mammal that is his boss. Nezdu shakes his head, pointedly looks at the boy who was now crouching down onto his hands and knees, and the cracking became audible to human ears. Izuku winces as his body breaks and bends at odd angles and shapes as his skin stretches and grows, discoloring and bubbling. The boils and blisters grew until they burst, Izuku's green hair grew at rapid pace and his antlers doubled in size. Soon Izuku as they knew him was gone, and stood in his place was a large emaciated dog with thousands of eyes and huge, thick antlers, stark white in color and covered in soft velvet. His gold eyes were gleaming and he growled, the guns flew to point at him and the heroes got prepared for a fight. However it never came. Instead of pouncing at them like they expected, the large 9-foot dog thing started making a hacking noise at the back of his throat. Soon the whole body was retching, body shaking like a dog throwing up or a cat coughing up a hairball, truly a disgusting sight. The heroes and SWAT were disturbed at the display as a large muscled and burned body covered in stomach acid, like a dog Izuku stretched and licked his lips and nose of saliva, before sneezing a finger belonging to the Nomu out of his mouth. The Nomu, completely out of it, was chained up and Chio took a sample of its blood while the truck was being prepared for the heavy transport of this Mary Shelley creation. Izuku spent the rest of the day curled up beside Nezdu in his office, in his form closest to a cat. His tentacles curled around him like a cushion and a pillow to rest on top of, while Nezdu, the tattoo-like eyes blinked drearily and out of sync. Nezdu smiled fondly at the boy on his desk and stroked his head to rouse the cat from dozing off. Izuku's head slowly rose, a tentacle coming up to rub the sleepy dust out of his eyes, and he sniffled. Come on, Chio has to do another checkup on you. Nezdu slipped out of his chair, the drop making his feet slam into the floor as he landed. Izuku levitated silently behind him, eyes blinking slowly and slowly gaining back sentience. The walk to Recovery Girl's med bay was long, as they were at opposite ends of the building, Recovery Girl being closer to the students while Nezdu stayed in admin and staff areas. As Nezdu walked through the halls, no doubt marking spots in his mind for new cameras and thermal sensors or the likes to boost security after the USJ Invasion, Izuku yawned several times, opening his mouth to see the tiny pinprick needle-like teeth in several rows. Eventually they make it into the med bay, where Recovery Girl is staring at her screen in concentration. Good evening, Chio. I brought dear Izuku, just as you asked. Nezdu spoke cheerfully, the cat, Izuku, headbutt into him from behind where he wasn't paying attention to where he was levitating. Ah Nezdu. I want to check some things. She spoke lightly, but Nezdu could see the concern in her eyes and nodded his head. Gonna need you to change back, my boy. Chio spoke, looking toward the cat floating at her eye level, who floated over to the med bay bed and with a lot of disturbing cracking and popping, which Chio worried immensely about, Izuku was sat on the bed all bleary-eyed. Oh, you must be exhausted. I'm sorry, I just need to take some blood and do a basic vitals check. She apologized. Izuku just smiled lightly and nodded. He let her take the needle to his arm, and watched as she drew blood while Nezdu climbed up onto the stepping stool she had tucked under the bed and sat by Izuku. Izuku sighed as the needle was pulled away, with a vial of blood attached, and held the cotton ball to his inner arm crease. You're a good bleeder, my boy. Chio complimented, but Izuku felt that it wasn't so much a compliment and more of a concerning statement coming from someone supposed to save lives. Doctor or hero? She took the blood to a microscope and examined it, the particles showing up on screen of her computer, where Izuku and Nezdu could see it. It meant nothing to Izuku, cells were not his expertise, but Nezdu frowned and leaned forward. "What's this?" he asked, questioning Chiyo. "It's Izuku's DNA. There's something different about it." She spoke. Izuku raised an eyebrow. "I see that." Nezdu continued, intrigued. She nodded once, before pulling up a second screen and showing that DNA next to Izuku's. "It's different, obviously. But there are similarities," she said, rubbing her hands together nervously. "So, like, a relative?" Izuku asked quietly, too tired to really be talking but trying to take in as much as he could. "No, Izuku. A species." Nezdu spoke. "This is the same DNA sequence a Nomu has," Chiyo said gently. Izuku paused, mind going blank. "Are you saying the Nomu has my DNA?" he asked. He knew that's not what they were saying, but god damn it, he didn't want what he was thinking to be true. It couldn't be true. He couldn't live with the fact that he was like that monster. The monster that hurt his dad. That made his papa cry. "Izuku, you're a Nomu." And with those words, Izuku feels like he is burning up as if he were on fire while simultaneously sinking deeper and deeper under the water. Choking on the smoke, the water. It's boiling and shockingly cold at the same time. "I'm not human. Hi guys, super sorry. I'm just not feeling this FIC much anymore. I'm going to change a few things I think, not abandon. You guys are too sweet for that. I couldn't let y'all down. I just don't like the writing I've done so far. So it's going to be rewritten as a different FIC, same concept though. I'll keep this one up for old time's sake, so it'll still be accessible for those who like it, but this FIC will be written no further. Lots of love, Mortala, smiley face. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them on the new FIC.